sessions that were submitted from this fall. And I guess I just would like to hear how you would like to use this information and how you want follow-up. Are there any topics you want to bring back as a discussion to a board meeting? Are there things in here that you would like to kind of send to either administrators and or committees? I've kind of gone through some of the items in here. I know I personally have kind of reached out to people. There were a couple on the true time system. I know we reviewed that in our HR committee to gain some insight into some of those concerns. But I appreciate the staff taking time to come to these meetings and giving us their input. But most importantly, as a board, how do you want to proceed with the information? If anybody has thoughts on that. Did you hear me, Mark?
I'm hearing fine, thank you.
All right, perfect. I know personally, when I went through them and reviewed them again over the weekend, some of it I think was time sensitive to when we had the meetings. The DEI came up frequently. I know that there were many people very concerned and probably still are concerned. At that time of the year, and I don't know if it's gotten much better, there was a real sense of being overwhelmed by our staff. Very concerned about too much on their plate, new initiatives. And again, is that a topic that as a board we should move forward to and discuss in more depth? What are the initiatives that we want to put out there? I'm not even sure what new initiatives are going on this year. I would assume it's the SEL. Is that just K4, K6?
K-12.
K-12.
And then I think you've got also the English learners is a big piece with some of our additional Spanish-speaking families. You have some things like we brought in Percy Brown to talk about how to address things like the N-word and other kind of racial slurs, how to address those as a staff, if you hear them and when you hear them. Those have been some of the pieces that have come through.
So, Randy, as board members have submitted kind of a synopsis of what we heard at these meetings, do you review them?
I review them, yeah. I mean, they're similarly to what I hear from, I do a monthly webinar with staff where I ask for questions ahead of time. And so many of the things you're hearing, I either hear through there or through my principals. So I don't think there was anything that necessarily was surprising to me that you heard.
Is it appropriate that the principals look at?
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't want to dominate what we do with this, but it seems that in some cases, there's procedural things in buildings that could be maybe navigated a little bit to make the culture a little bit easier.
Absolutely.
I guess I think it's important to share out.
Yeah, my takeaway was that most of the principals knew about the concerns, at least that I sat in on.
Yeah.
I sat in on 2 elementary schools and intermediate, so I sort of felt like the principals knew of some of the struggles that the 2 schools were going through.
Right.
Especially at the elementary level, trying to to jam in a new curriculum
Yeah.
or to try to catch up. Maybe putting pressure on younger students and not giving them enough time to actually learn in a more engaging, I guess, to sort of set the tone for enjoying school
Yeah.
instead of just being thrown sheets and information and stuff where they weren't able to break out into smaller groups and enjoy learning hands-on things that's sort of stressed the teachers out that they were sort of getting away from that.
Yeah, definitely.
But I didn't feel like the principals didn't know
I
about what
would
was
agree.
going on.
I would agree.
I guess,
From like, I don't know what the, thinking back to the middle school, and there was obviously a lot of concern with the middle school in just terms of behavior and things like that, and I'm sure it was at every school, right? But, so I was at the intermediate, the middle school and high school listening sessions, and to what extent can we as a board set policies or whatever to make sure behavior is appropriate? You know, I think that's what I kind of get the sense out of a lot of teachers, they don't know how to necessarily correct behavior that maybe isn't, appropriate.
Sure.
And so their hands are tied, they can't do anything. How can we deal with that? We know it exists and we just let it go?
Well, I think there's two things to that, Ted. I think one of them was particularly this fall, and I think Brian and Tim addressed it at one of our engagement sessions. We were having to reteach a lot of behavior that kids just normally had in the school. I mean, just having been virtual for that year, coming back into school, kids were really having to be taught again how to interact in a school setting and interact with each other. So there was absolutely a lot of that pieces. The other piece is, I think some of the things that we are doing are meant to assist with, a lot of the social emotional learning pieces is built on relationship building. And relationship building is one of the things that are key to helping to manage the classroom and manage behavior. So some of those pieces some of our work with regards to some of the social emotional learning aspects aren't just kind of the mental health pieces. It's also tied into, and initially was a response to kind of behaviors that we were seeing in the classroom and making connections with kids. So I think that's an example of kind of an initiative piece coming forward. I don't want to say it's new to education, but we're trying to be more purposeful with it to try to address some of the things that were exactly that concern. And it's the same thing with like the English learners. I mean, trying to work, how do we address the needs of those kids and then being able to provide some of the development around it. And some of those are taking some time. So I think you've given us some direction from a board's perspective as far as some of the work that we're doing, because I think that's addressing, at least that's the intent of it, is to be addressing some of those behavioral aspects. But a lot of what I think you heard from staff this year was things that were just general behavior things that we kind of took for granted prior to all the pandemic and virtual learning. We were having to reteach. Principals were out on the playground for the first 9 weeks just teaching kids playground rules that previously were just kind of embedded. At the high school, Brian was feeling like you had kids who are now sophomores who never really saw the models of what it was from the upperclassmen to teach them the culture of the school, so they had to go back and teach some of those. So part of it, I think, is that, and then the other part is trying to give tools to our teachers as far as how do we work with the dynamic range of students that we have in our classroom.
Do they have enough tools to keep order, for example? Is that some of the things, I kind of got a sense out of that listening to them, that it's a really difficult thing to maintain that order in order to be effective teaching.
Right. I think it's dependent on the teacher. I think as far as, and also kind of some of those pieces as far as how do you, and one of the things we get challenged with is that if you remove a student from a classroom and they're spending a lot of time with, for example, their principal, the relationship is now built between the kid and the principal. And now when you want to bring the kid back to the classroom, the relationship's not there. So it's trying to figure out how do we hold accountability, but also kind of look at what's the core behind the behaviors and also build a relationship with the instructor and the child to be able to make sure that then that's where that's built on and that's how you kind of move forward. Yeah, it's not a perfect answer, Ted, because I think there's some underlying challenges that we have with some of the kids that are bringing forth some of the behaviors. But the biggest thing I think you heard generally from staff this fall was we're doing a lot more classroom management in October than we've ever done. And a lot of it was reteaching just things that were kind of ingrained as far as being in school.
You think that's settled down now?
I think it's settled down. I think it kind of, I mean, we also kind of go in streaks, as you're well aware. You kind of have your highs and lows. I mean, kids are getting tired of a lot of the things that we all are. So, I mean, those are the pieces. I mean, we're dealing with all the same things in school. We're just a microcosm of our community. So, I think generally kids like being in school and like their activities, but certainly there's a lot going on with regards to other things around them.
Well, that's why I just wondered when we look at a lot of the concerns that came in, when did we get these in? Beginning, at the end of October, we went through a lot of these things. And I'm just wondering if some of those issues have settled somewhat, or things are more under control, or, I mean, this is a slow-moving process. We hear something and before we can discuss it and then do something about it, a lot of time goes by, so.
Some of those they're not really things that you can just say, do this.
No.
And you solve it. They're much more dynamic than that. I mean, it's kind of a piece Joan and I talked about when we start looking at like professional development days, is we realize staff are busy.
Yeah.
And staff are also looking at, and they feel like there's a lot going on, and can you provide a day that it's more of a work day as opposed to a development structured day? Well, but the things that we're trying to put into those days are things to help them with the concerns that they've brought forward. So it's things like the EL instruction, or trying to work with kids on some of the mental health relationships. A lot of it's on relationships. Things where direct response to some of the equity stuff was, how do we respond when we hear a kid using an inappropriate term? Uncomfortable with that, how do we do it? So we provided some guidance on that. So I think it's trying to be responsive. But I realize that when you add things in, that also adds a degree of stress, but they're also added in to help alleviate things that are directly associated with concerns that have been brought forward. And I think we've been trying to be quite responsive to that.
When you add those trainings regarding how to respond to, a slur or something
Right.
like that, do you see an uptick in reporting? Or do you just sort of see it, no change?
I don't know if I've seen an uptick. I think it's more of they're kind of the tools from a teacher's perspective as far as how do I address it when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was more of the tool piece that I walked away with, was if I was a teacher and I heard this, how do I approach it? And kind of how do you have that conversation with kids? As opposed to it, I mean, and this wasn't just around that topic, but instead of something immediately being punitive, how do you kind of work with the kids and talk to them? I had an example. Someone was talking to me about masks today, and it was like, well, you can yell, everybody needs to put their mask on correctly, or you can work with the kids and talk to them in their individual groups, how they're clustered, and say, here's why I need you to do this. Here's what I need you to do. And it's kind of, how do you have that relationship? How do you have that communication versus it just being kind of an edict? So I think those are some of the things that are kind of that, when I saw came out of that, at least what I would have taken out was, how do I have the conversation, which maybe right now I'm a little uncomfortable with doing.
Do we have a system in line when somebody crosses that line where
Oh, sure.
it's an immediate,
Yeah,
you're not sitting in class.
Yeah, there's
You
def-
need to, okay.
there's
I
definitely
think that's
things-
where some of those issues that we
Yeah,
hear from.
and it's, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely within every school, every principal has that threshold where kids are sent to the office. I mean, there's not a principal in our district that doesn't experience that on some level at a daily basis. And it's, that's something that they establish with their staff in school. And it's also the balancing act as far as how much needs to be addressed by the individual who works closest with the kid
Right.
versus it just being something of a removal. Again, and sometimes what we've seen is then the relationship gets built with somebody else.
Mhm.
And then that doesn't help reintegrating the student in to know what the correct behavior is. So it's kind of both.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is tough, but I think what you see with kids here, somebody else calls somebody a certain,
Oh,
a
sure.
certain name, and the teacher says, hey, knock that off, and
Right.
keeps going about their business, then you've got 10 kids here saying
Right.
nothing was done.
Right.
You know, it was,
Yeah.
and so that's what I'm saying. If everyone's threshold is different,
Yeah.
your threshold's one way, but if everybody else says, well, I get to judge what my threshold is, then
Yeah.
we're gonna constantly have
I
these.
mean, when
these
I go
issues.
back to my days as a principal, I had teachers that had different thresholds of what they could tolerate in the classroom. Some really don't want to send anybody to the principal. They want to be able to handle it more specifically themselves, and others, that's a quicker reaction. And I think that's not unique to the time frame when I work. That's still effective today. But it's trying to give folks as many tools as we can to help them along. I mean, we've done things we brought in Ross Green a few years ago, who was really talking about how do you work with kids? How do you kind of get to, kids don't necessarily want to be behaving poorly, so how do you help to get to know them so you understand kind of what their trigger points are? I mean, it's some of those type of things that we have to kind of work through. I mean, even in talking to our staff, I mean, some are extremely good relationship builders, and some really want to learn, how do I do that better? So I think that's and that differs by level as well.
Yeah, but if somebody wants to keep somebody to be able to keep that relationship together, and it takes 15 minutes, that 15 minutes, the class isn't learning anything.
Correct.
And so that's where the struggle is, and that's why it's easy for a teacher to sort of, not easy, but it's lighter to push a teacher to be able to say, I'm gonna deal with that later,
Right.
because I can't put these 20 other kids out.
And I think it depends on what the issue is.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, what you've got to be able to, certainly things, if it's taken that much time in a classroom, you need to address it differently. But some of them are kind of your expectations and how you run your classroom too, and structure. But,
So you initially asked, what do you think we should be doing about this? I mean, I followed up with, I think in each case of them, there was topics that I wanted to learn a little bit more about, so I reached out to those teachers and they met with me and we talked further about it, which helped me, didn't do anything for them. They vented again on, or talked about stuff, which I think they appreciated, but it's a good question, how do you, if we're asking for that information, here we go again with having a survey, we better do something with it.
Right.
Well, and part of it is awareness and background knowledge, like you just said. It helps educate us, so when topics come up in committee and to us, and it you know, some of it is not very actionable, but it's still great background knowledge. Is there more that we want to do? There is one topic, and it is on our agenda tonight. It's about open enroll kids. It came up in one of the meetings. Could staff have priority with open enroll so that we keep the staff member? How many staff members do we lose because they want to be in the district with their kid? If we could prioritize open enroll to staff members, is there a law that prohibits us from doing that?
Yes.
Yes.
There you go.
Thank
There's your answer.
you.
Yeah, that does prohibit it. But that's you look at an actionable step. The board made a very actionable step during the current budget cycle we're in. We could have reduced the number of staff we had this year, given what our class sizes were.
Yeah.
But we maintained the staffing we had from our virtual time.
And we heard that.
To keep class sizes low. It was kind of our first ability to kind of say, we have some extra staff here, but we're going to hold them to bring class sizes down to help with exactly what part of the question was. If my class sizes are so large, it makes it harder to maintain. Knowing that we needed to have a transition coming out of virtual last year, we maintained, it was probably 3 or 4 staff that we maintained, particularly at the elementary level, that really helped to bring some of those numbers down. So that's an actionable thing I think the board did as that was discussed as we brought those things forward. And you'll see that tonight when Steve kind of brings forward some things with open enrollment in the budgets.
So Steve, what is the lawfulness of staff members and open enrollment?
Sure. So with open enrollment, there are a couple of exceptions that the board can write into the policy to grant automatic approvals. And those are noted in state law. And those two situations are when a Waunakee resident moves outside of Waunakee, our policy can be written to allow that student to automatically be approved to continue. The second case, it revolves around siblings.
Okay.
So once an open enrollment student has been accepted, we can put in our policy the automatic approval of a sibling. Those are the two, I would say, options within open enrollment, and we've selected both of them.
Correct.
We then have to identify the number of openings available per grade level based on looking at our class size policy.
Correct.
Once we have that total, those spots can be applied to by any students, irregardless of if their parents or staff members or not. And then if we go over, so let's say there's more requests than spots, the DPI requires us to have a random selection process.
So then there's no place
There-
that we could.
no. So then you have to randomly select. So typically, like 4K, we've had more requests than spots.
Right.
Then we have to do a random selection process, and then we create a waiting list.
Yeah.
But whether you work for the district or not is not a variable that's currently allowed under Wisconsin's open enrollment law.
Thank you. Good to know. Good to know that background. Well, I want everybody to have a few minutes before we start the next part, so I appreciate the input, and, you know, if anything comes out of this that you want to further see at a meeting, please let me know or let Randy know, and we're sure to give you time to discuss it. So,
Maybe what I
thank
can
you.
do, Joan, maybe you and I, and the next time we meet, we can kind of talk about it as well.
Sure.
And then we can kind of see
That'd be
where we
great.
go with that.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the things that you could potentially do, and there's some themes in here, right?
There definitely are
And,
some themes in there, Jeff.
You know, you can
Yeah.
kind of organize all of the topics that
Yeah.
might fall under a theme.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the other thing too, when you start looking at, you know, we're putting too many new programs in.
Yeah, I do want to
you know,
be conscious of
and
that.
I think one of the things, and that I think is a good thing from the standpoint of a three-year budgeting process, you know, we can start looking at how do we phase these programs in over a three-year period so that, you know, we're kind of prepping. You know, because I think what happens is we've got the next good idea, and instead of providing some, you know, just time to digest, you know, you can say, okay, this is where we're going, and maybe it's year 2 that you implement the program.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Few minutes and then we'll start again. And Randy, I don't want to lose sight of our Title IX workshop. Dominic?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it's a little chilly out there, but we appreciate people coming and attending our meeting, so thank you. So the first thing tonight, actually we started at 6 for the public to recognize and notice. We started tonight at 6. We had some closed session items. We did a little board development, and now we are back in our open session portion of the meeting. The first thing that I would like is to ask for approval of the minutes from our December 13th meeting, which are in your book.
Second.
So moved by Judy, second please.
Second?
Second by Jack. Any questions or comments on those minutes? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I need approval of the agenda for this evening with no changes.
As written.
Okay.
So moved.
Jack, and a second.
Second.
By Ted. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And I don't believe we received any public comments. Anybody at the last minute? Annie? Nope. Thank you. So our reports tonight, we'll start with our student report, and we are fortunate to have both of our students here. Thank you for coming, Marissa and Izzy.
So I want to start off by apologizing for not being here the last couple of times.
No
I know
worries.
I have hockey practice daily in Sun Prairie, and then Marissa has dance, so it's just trying to schedule around that. And then talking about what student council is doing right now. Right now we're kind of thinking about winter formal a lot because we're trying to figure out if we're going to do it or not, because we know that with COVID going on, we're trying to figure out if it would be safe. Because we know in homecoming there was a little bit of an issue with keeping the masks on when everybody was inside, and just with the cases, we want to be able to stay open and everything. So I'm in charge of that with another officer, so we'll be working through that to try and make a definite decision on that.
When would winter formal be?
I think it would be February 12th.
Students have also voiced concerns about parking that staff members are parking in student parking, specifically the lot near the main office, which leaves a more limited amount of parking for students and pushes them to the farther parking lots, which is lot E and F. Staff and administration have also voiced concerns that students are parking in staff parking, which is by the greenhouse, which are numbered for staff, but remains to be empty because staff is parking elsewhere to be closer to the building and like entrances and stuff like that. So we are asking for a re-evaluation for parking for every party involved for either this coming semester or the following school year.
Is Mr. Borowski aware of that?
Is what?
Is Mr. Borowski aware of that?
I would assume so, just because it's on the announcements every day.
All right. Okay.
So,
We'll follow up.
yeah, okay, sounds good. Finals week is coming up next week, and kids are pretty stressed with studying and homework this week, so that's
Yeah, and then another thing going on is course planning is starting, which I know it's kind of boring, just planning your courses for next year. There's not much to talk about it for it, but it's going on. And then, what's just the next? Oh yeah, so kids are just a little iffy right now about whether we're gonna stay in school or go virtual. So there's just been like lots of talk kind of in the hallways, like, oh my goodness, your medicine went virtual, and then like just kind of back and forth and just thinking about the stress, like with finals week coming up, what happens if we go virtual, and then just like wanting kind of a definite, like, we're just gonna stay in person or we're not, which I know you guys might not be able to do right now because of the COVID statistics, but just there's a lot of talk about that.
No, our priority is to stay in person.
Okay.
So that's where we're trying to stay.
Okay, good to know.
If we can, we
Yes.
will.
it is good to know. We have a blood drive coming up next week, and last time we had a very good turnout, and we're hoping for the same numbers again, if not more. And then our final update is winter sports are in full swing with hockey and basketball as well as others. There were some issues with sportsmanship in the student section. There was an email sent out to the student body and parents regarding the issue, and so hopefully in the future that will be resolved. And that is our update for this month. So, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, ladies. Anybody have any questions for our speakers this evening? we do really appreciate you coming out and giving us the update of the culture of what you're seeing there. So thank you so much.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Thanks, ladies.
So go home and study for those finals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll do. Next, we have our teacher update, and Gina and Bethany. Again, thank you, ladies, for coming out.
Hello. First, we want to say we appreciate all the measures that the school district has taken in order to keep us all safe and healthy and in person. We really appreciate having the testing site available. And we also really encourage you to do whatever you can to get the message out to families, parents and students, to emphasize the importance of the masking and making sure that masks are over the nose and double checking. I know sometimes the elastic on masks can get kind of loose after having washed them a lot. But just we really want to make sure that we stay safe because we really don't want to have to go virtual. So we just want to get that message out there.
That's a good reminder. Maybe Annie can help us with that reminder. She's shaking her head back there.
We're also looking forward to our upcoming staff development days, which will focus on the needs of English language learners at the elementary level and some further deep dive into developmental designs work. We ask that you stay tuned for upcoming news about ways that the WTA is working to help families in need in our community and in our schools. We've heard that there's a great need, especially for larger size snow pants. So we're going to be working on a drive as well as an opportunity to donate in order to meet families' day-to-day needs. We're looking forward to following up with the school board candidates and hearing their ideas for the future of our schools. So if you'll be on the ballot, we'll be in touch. And that's it.
So would your drive for the needs of your families, I personally would appreciate being included in that email. It'll just be to staff.
We plan to share it publicly on our Facebook page, so there's another opportunity for you to follow our public WTA page.
Okay.
We also can include the school board on our staff communication.
'Cause I have some snow pants. I have some things I'd like to clean out.
Excellent. We've heard from social workers that that's a need that's hard to meet, so
Yeah,
we're
actually,
partnering with them to try to support our families.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Any questions for Gina or Bethany? And again, thanks for venturing out on this cold evening, and good luck with the end of your semesters. Well, you guys are both trimesters, right?
I'm on a semester, but she's on a trimester. So. Yeah.
Thank
Only
you.
450 report cards coming up in a couple weeks. For now, I'll just get back.
Have fun. It's your turn. Remember, I
ladies.
did do that.
Right, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have a section devoted to any board meetings, trainings, anything that individual board members would like to share with the group. I know with the holidays, there weren't that many opportunities. But then we do come to the WASD resolution portion. So I am going to be the delegate this year. They have made that a Zoom option, and depending on COVID and the weather and everything, it may be a Zoom for me, or I might drive down. So either way, I will be doing the representation as your delegate this year. The resolutions were in the packet. I received actually a copy much earlier. They're not as lengthy as some years. I have received some information from the public. on some of the resolutions. I've received information on 2 staff members on some of the resolutions, but this is an opportunity for the board to give me any input that you might have on any of the resolutions that are coming forward. And if not now, know that this meeting is next week on Wednesday. And if there is anything that you would like to weigh in on, please feel free to reach out and send me that input, and I'd be happy to, include it as I listen to the debate and the rationale on these resolutions. Any other concerns on that? Brian, you did it last year. Any tips?
I was all virtual last year, so.
Yeah.
There was some good debates on a couple things,
Yeah.
but
Did it work doing it
yeah.
virtual? Yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Next we have the spring election, and thank you to all the candidates that submitted your papers in time to be on the ballot. For a member of this district and the community, I appreciate people willing to serve and willing to do that. The town of Dane Springfield is just Judith Engelbretson is running unopposed. For our Village of Waunakee seats, Jack Heineman, David Betcher, and Katie Dolzer have submitted papers. And we will select 2 out of those 3. So thank you each for doing that. Rebecca, you needed exemption.
And I put one in everybody's folder who hadn't turned one in to me yet.
Okay.
So if you can fill that out, even if you're a candidate, I need you to fill that out for your time as a board member from now until April.
So everybody has to fill one out.
Everyone has to fill that out, yes.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I see it. Okay. Anybody have any questions on the election information? All right, thank you. The next part is to look at our evaluation process. So, Ted, you're kind of new to this, and if anybody else has any questions. So, on an annual basis, we do a board self-evaluation. We do that with a outfit from School Perception. It's a survey, and in your packet there will be a code, a computer code that you can cue into and get that survey. There's also some open-ended questions that were created before my time that just strengths and weaknesses and things that allow us to look at how we are doing as a job and an entity. We will have a superintendent evaluation. That's one of our jobs as a school board, is to evaluate our superintendent and the priorities that we have given to have him look at this year. So at this point, you will see in your packet the board evaluation information and the open-ended questions, and next month we will go through where the superintendent information can be found. And in the end, we need to have it all done toward the end of March prior to the election so that we can kind of get together before anybody changes seats on the board and look at that information as the 7 that are currently sitting here. Anybody have any questions? Ted, I know that was kind of fast.
I got
All
it.
okay?
Can I add one thing?
Yep.
Next month in closed session, there'll be 2 things. One will be just kind of a review as per our policy with regards to just all of our administrative team. And then second part would be just an update from me kind of on a mid-year kind of self-evaluation that can kind of give you some insight as you kind of look at the evaluation process and where we're at with some of the initiatives that we have.
Perfect, thank you. And the last thing before I turn it over to Randy, and this is, I probably will need his input. Last month, we looked at our coming community engagement topic, which at this point is scheduled for January 31st, bringing that back up for discussion. There was a concern, we had looked at maybe doing referendum. A board member reached out and thought maybe safety would be a better topic. As I'm sitting here with COVID numbers skyrocketing, do we also want to look at the format that we've been using and maybe try something different? We didn't have a big attendance group last one. Maybe we want to try virtual this time. Anyway, that's decisions that I know Randy needs tonight so that he can begin the planning for that 31st.
Yeah, just to kind of give you an idea, so the facilities planning piece, if that's the direction we stay with, that would be kind of the high-level pieces that the board has seen at a couple different venues. We're going to talk about some of the items tonight. Mark Roffers is here to give a report on enrollment projections, some of the capacity pieces that we've been doing with EUA. And we'll also be able to talk a little bit about some of the financial aspects of what a referendum structure could look like. But I think if we did move ahead with that topic, it would be kind of letting the community know generally what's on the table that we're considering, so that they have kind of a general idea as far as what's going to be kind of vetted out as we move through the spring. If you choose to move that topic and we move it to like a school safety topic at January 31st, I would say that at some point in February, we're still going to need to do the referendum pieces. I think that's important for us to get out there too. So I'm just looking for some feedback as far as kind of what topic you feel is the most pressing to do at the end of January. We can generally go either way, but I am going to have to schedule a facilities piece in there at some point. There'll be some additional opportunities that we're going to need to do around that because that's a pretty big topic as we move forward.
I think we should stay with the referendum topic on the 31st. I just think we need to get this going as quickly as possible and not add another layer of community engagement topics. I think we should just focus in.
I would agree. Keep it focused on that and then have the safety on the next surrounding topics.
I agree as well. I just was wondering about the platform, whether people are going to stay awake or are they going to come.
Right.
It could be a piece we try virtually. I mean, we've had really good, we could do it that way. We've had good participation. It seems to be an easy way for people to tie in as opposed to coming out or trying to watch it. If that's a direction you'd like to go, we can certainly try that. We do it as probably more like a webinar type presence.
Could we do both? In other words, if we held it here, we could still have a fair number of people in the room, and people could still see online, and if we could allow a way for them to submit questions, like just put in the chat on the Zoom, any questions they wanted to do, we could in effect do both.
There's ways to do it, sure. If you'd like to do it in here where we're in person, I mean, then we'd run it as a Zoom off of there. That would be the one place that it's up.
Right.
It wouldn't be where we each have it up.
I don't think we could do it at the PAC that way.
No, it doesn't really work in that venue very well.
I like that idea.
It would limit
I like
your
that idea
audience.
as opposed to just a Zoom. I wouldn't like that idea. And
You like that piece?
I like what Dave mentioned. Yeah.
Can we go back to the topic? We'll narrow down the topic first and then talk about the format. So I heard Judy, we have people who are more interested in the referendum.
I'll
Dave,
join the referendum group.
You want to join the referendum group? I guess I personally think the referendum at this time might be a more needed topic, and I think engage the public more. Mark, do you have a question or a concern on safety or referendum? And you are muted, so unmute to talk to me. Mark, you have to unmute yourself.
There we go.
Hi.
I prefer us to stay on the referendum topic, facility topic. I think is one our administration is prepared to present. I don't minimize the other topic, I just think this is a time for the facility planning.
Okay. Jack, are you okay with referendum?
That's fine.
Okay, so we're going to stay with referendum topic. So let's talk about the format. I actually love what Dave just said, having it here, and, you know, we can get a fair number of people in the room,
Yeah, I don't see any reason, I mean, we've,
and then opening it up for virtual as well.
yeah, I'd probably just move that table up from a presenting standpoint. We kind of converge that, and then we could have seats around, so it would work.
I like that idea. Any, everybody good with that?
The hybrid.
A hybrid?
I like it.
I like it. We're an easy group tonight. All
right.
right, moving on. What else?
be
you
done
want?
by-
What else will be done at 8 o'clock?
Yeah, that was, this to kind of look at that was on January 31st. So that's what we're looking at.
Okay, perfect. So next we're going to review COVID.
All right.
I
so
wonder if we ever get to have this off our
I'm
agenda.
looking forward to that day, Joan. That would be great. What I have in front of you tonight, I'm going to show you a couple different items, and some of them I'm going to talk through. If you can just bring up the one that shows this week's kind of data chart like this, Rebecca. Yep, that's correct. So this is really looking at from January 4th through January 10th. So just really the last week that we've been back from break. And just trying to give you an idea of kind of what we're seeing with regards to staff positives, quarantines, positive cases, quarantines, et cetera. For this past week, we've had 22 staff that have been positive for COVID. That's in, so if you go back and you look at a month ago, we had 2. So a month ago at this time, kind of the report that I brought forth here, we would have been at 2. Student cases, we had 102 in the last week. A month ago, we had 15. Student quarantines, we were at 120. A month ago, we were at 56. So I don't think it's probably surprising that we've had an uptick in COVID activity. I mean, certainly that's been a piece that we've been working through. Our contact tracers have been working very diligently to be in communication with parents and following up on all of those pieces. But definitely it's been a busier uptick. I think the ladies who are presenting here tonight from the high school were asking about kind of operations. I think that's the piece that's on a lot of people's minds. I mean, our intent is to be doing everything we can to stay in person. We believe that's the best approach for us educationally. The greatest piece that we have from a standpoint of not being able to do that is more on the staffing end. I mean, certainly the COVID numbers kind of are speaking for themselves, but as we kind of look at kind of what that does from a staffing perspective and being able to kind of fill vacancies, that's definitely a challenge we see every day. Our principals are really doing kind of triage and planning every morning when they get in, because we cannot fill every one of our substitute teacher positions. We have subs for our teachers and for our paraeducators. So I think, I mean, today was an example. I think we had, was it 18 or 20 positions that weren't filled, that were then filled internally by moving staff around. So it is something that I think we can continue to do here short term, but it can't be a kind of a long-term solution. So I do implore anybody who has an interest in substitute teaching. We are very interested in adding people to our pool. We'll be kind of working to see if we can grab some of the December grads to come in, and Brian is planning a substitute teacher training again here in the coming weeks to try to add to our pool. Even though it's been a challenge for us, I know that as Brian has worked with his HR colleagues around the area, I feel we are in a better position than pretty much all of our neighbors. We are in a place where it's still a challenge on our staff, and I want to extend my appreciation to them for really kind of them stepping in, taking on some extra kids, taking on some extra sections during the day, so that we can kind of continue to move those things forward. Just to give you an idea, kind of, you can see kind of where the COVID numbers were. There was also I mean, when we go back a month ago, we were averaging about 8 students, this is community-wide. We had about 8 community members per day on a 7-day average. So I don't have that document in front of you here tonight, but I can send it out to you later. Today we have an average of 23 cases community-wise with regards to COVID. So from 8 to 23, and this is off of the DHS website. We've often used a figure that that the CDC has used as far as level of community spread. Anything above 100 is considered high spread. A month ago we were at 304, today we're at 809. The county I think was at 1,500. So you do have a lot of different spread that's happening. Certainly there's been folks who have been getting at different varying levels of illness. I'm talking to our nurses today. It seems like mainly what they're dealing with is more mild cases of it amongst our students is what they're generally seeing. But certainly the thing that we can ask all of our parents is if kids have symptoms and are concerned, please keep them home. And obviously we do have our testing line out here. I mean, Jack was asking me just a few questions about that. We do contract out with Summit Labs. That's actually a contract that the state does. The district is not paying for any of the COVID testing that's taking place. That's through a state initiative that they put forth just specifically for schools and school districts. So we're very happy that we have that. I do realize that it is a long wait. I mean, we have a couple-hour wait to work your way through that. We have people who are lined up here probably an hour in advance of us opening up at 8 o'clock in order for the tests to start. So they do both tests out here at our site. They do both the antigen test and the PCR test. However, recently they have run out of the antigen test, so we've only been doing PCRs the last few days. Hopefully that'll turn around at some point, but that is a piece that's I think a national issue as far as shortage of testing pieces. I think what you're finding is that to go to other places to get tested, and there's more openings opening up at like Alliant Energy Center, etc., but you're having to register and you're not getting in on the same day. So this is at least the best service that we can provide. We are looking at any other options to also help to figure out how we can help test staff, because if a staff member wants to get tested to see if they have, and the line is not a conducive way for us to do that, so we're trying to look at different options. I don't have a great solution to that yet, but it's a piece that we're brainstorming through.
Do they give you a specific number of people to do the tests, or is it?
Right. They give us, right now we have anywhere between usually 2 to 3 people who are providing that. We are asking for some additional staff, and they are employees of Summit Labs as opposed to ours. So we are seeking that out to try to move the line along quicker, and we're also looking at some other options within that model. But I know Brian Grabarski and Chris Mand work very closely with that, have been very much involved with working with Summit, particularly as we've kind of just had some slowdowns the last number of days and trying to make sure we keep it moving.
So did you see the lines really increase before Christmas, and now they're increasing now after Christmas? Do you perceive like in the next month?
I think what you saw, Jack, was you saw the lines generally increasing before Christmas, and then they took off after Christmas. Over the break, and they just continued. So I think that you're kind of you were on the upward tick before the holidays, and it's just continued. So I think the piece that we're watching, and this is just speculation, is there a point where we're going to peak and then you'll start to see it drop? That's my anticipation. And I've heard that from a few folks in the medical community who had some interaction with, but that's a piece still to be seen.
Are other districts doing this as well?
Absolutely. I mean, as far as testing, you mean?
Correct.
Most are. Some of them are trying to they didn't get it. We were early adopters into the program. There were some that did not, and now we're trying to get in, and that's a little bit more challenging. So, but yeah, we got on as soon as we were able to register for that. I think we registered for it last spring, and then once it was released, we were on top of it as soon as we were able to. So those are the pieces that we're trying to do. I mean, our goal is to certainly keep school moving forward. Over break, the CDC did come out with different protocols And then we worked with public health last week to try to understand really what those meant for us. The biggest change that they had was with regards to quarantine and isolation. If you remember, you've had like the 14-day isolation, or then you was moved down to, with a test, it could be 6 or 7 days. They've moved everything down to 5 days at this point. So if you were a close contact, or if you turned positive for COVID, you could have, there's a 5-day period of time before you're able to return. If you're positive for COVID, then you have to be fever-free without any medications, and you have to have your symptoms improving. And then there's also a requirement that after that you would mask for an additional 5 days. At this point, that's not really an issue for us because we have kind of the orders in place where everybody's masked. That's allowing us to try to get people back sooner. But we're having to explain some of that pieces because you can technically have somebody who, example I've used a few times, is somebody could have symptoms on Friday night. So then they're not feeling well over the weekend, they get tested Monday morning. They're starting to feel better, they get their test results on Tuesday, comes out that they're positive for COVID, they could technically be back in school on Wednesday. So the timing of when you get your tests back in that 5 days has been causing some question. The whole premise behind the 5 days is during those 5 days is really when people are most likely to be shedding the virus, and after that, less likely. So that's really that's what the shift came down to. But then it's tied into masking for 5 days after that. But we're trying to utilize that as much as we're able to for getting kids and staff back soon.
These new guidelines you gave us, are these on the website already?
These will be sent out to staff. They'll be sent out to parents tomorrow. This is kind of a piece that we've been working on. So in your packet, you'll see what Dave's referring to as kind of our protocols. And it really just talks about kind of how we go through and identify the close contacts, the 5-day quarantine, and really the new guidance that we have. So this will go out to staff and to our parents tomorrow, and it will be up on our website at that time. So with that, I'll take on any questions that anybody has. Tomorrow I do have a staff webinar. And one of the things that I really appreciate her for is Jenny Seidow, who's one of our school nurses, is actually going to be one of the co-presenters, and she's just going to talk to staff just about what our protocols are in school, how they kind of assess kids who have symptoms, which kids they keep, which kids they send home, and just some of just updating kind of what our health protocols are from our nursing staff as they're working on the front lines to really kind of manage this.
On one of these guidelines, it just seemed a little weird. It says that if you've exposed or whatever to someone, you have tested positive for COVID in the last 90 days, you have to wear a face covering around others for 10 days. Does that mean 100 days?
No, it's just...
Because if you tested positive in the last 90 days, it shouldn't just say if you've tested positive for COVID.
Yeah, this is kind of your close contact piece, I believe. So if you were deemed to be a close contact, but you had COVID in the last 90 days, you don't need to quarantine, but you need to wear a mask, is what it's saying.
Oh, so you have to meet both those conditions.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Those are the new guidelines.
And that would be, and obviously some of this would only apply if Dane County lifts the mask mandate.
Correct.
We have to wear a mask.
These are the guidelines, we put them in here, but if the mandate were to go away, these are still the guidelines that we would have.
Okay.
So the mandate right now, Dane County is in place until February 1st.
Till February 1st, and then it'll be reviewed at a point before that.
And if it goes away, we still will have in place the choral sections in our district wearing a mask until after we review that. Did we put that in?
We did put that in there. I
place?
thought we put a time frame to it, but yes, that was...
I think it's going to be reviewed again in February.
Yeah, February.
So
Correct.
that would stay in place, just
Yep.
for clarification
Yep.
on that.
Yep.
Okay.
It would go, if it were to go away, then that would be our decision at the board level was the mask optional, except for the choral, for the music departments with regards to what you're referring to then be reviewed again in February.
Perfect. Any questions on our COVID protocol update?
Yeah, just one other piece of data that I had that was handed to me before I kind of.
And Mark had a question
Oh,
also.
sorry.
Yeah, do you have any quantitative data about numbers of unvaccinated students who have become vaccinated in the recent weeks? Or have the numbers pretty much plateaued? Is there a way that we get that information when they get vaccinated to know those things?
I guess that'd be a question I'd have to ask our nurses, Mark. I don't think it's a number we've necessarily tracked as far as vaccinated or unvaccinated. Certainly they're working through that as they're doing their as they're working with individual families. I did see a statistic here last week that, and don't quote me specifically on it, but it was like 72% of our students in Waunakee were vaccinated with both of the shots, and like 66% had at least one. So it was something of that nature. And that was K through 12. The other data point I just want to share, this was just kind of we had a request from the Cap Times just with regards to absenteeism levels. I mean, generally when we take a look at from January 3rd through the 7th, we're looking at, we had attendance of students at about 89%. So about 11 or 12% of our students were out for various reasons. Not all of these were COVID related. These could have been, this is just a general absentee report. But we're getting some more information, getting requests from some of the media just around some of the data points that kind of show kind of how things are impacting us. We definitely have some more kids out, but I've actually felt that was actually that's actually pretty high. And I didn't go back yet today to look at kind of where we were like a year ago or in previous years at this time. But I thought that was actually a pretty high number. That's the end of my report for that.
Thank you very much, Randy. Any other clarifications, comments on our COVID? Okay, moving on to our committee reports this evening, starting with HR. Judy, Brian's probably.
I think Brian's on his way up, so.
Brian. So we do have a
We have an actionable item tonight.
fairly significant actionable item.
Judy, do you
No,
want?
please, go ahead.
So there are two items up for the board's consideration that were advanced from the HR committee after their review and development over the last several months. The first is an incentive package for the members of our teaching group for those that are age eligible to retire. As some of the materials and many of you I know have been following the discussion, the reason for this proposal is district strategy to try to clear funding for us to have availability to offer compensation increases next year to our returning staff. The state budget and the position that has put us into for next year makes it a very challenging financial environment for us without having any additional funding coming to the district outside of that which is connected to enrollment. And so one of the strategies that could be attempted or used would be to have staff near the end of their careers or generally very experienced staff retire, which would then allow us the opportunity to hire replacements. And as we look at the data over past years, that's a significant savings between an experienced end-of-career teacher and a less experienced teacher. And again, this opportunity presents itself because the funding for current employees comes out of Fund 10. The funding for retirement benefits comes out of Fund 73. And so there again is savings in Fund 10. We're using Fund 73 money to do so. And so what the package offers is that a teacher that is eligible to retire, so that's age 55 before June 30th of this school year, would identify that they are going to retire by the unique timeline of February 28th to allow us to post earlier for their replacement. And then they would be given or granted their typical retirement package that they've earned based on their years of service and date of hire. And then additionally, $38,000 would be added to that retirement package, again, from Fund 73. And then they would, obviously would collect that over the proposed timeline, which mirrors the typical distribution of retirement benefits for teachers.
How many teachers do you think would take advantage of this? How many, what's the total that qualify for this?
Within, again, the data, we had about, in terms of staff, teachers identified that 75% of the teachers that were age eligible to retire, which is approximately 53 individuals, said that an increase in benefits would make them strongly consider retirement. Again, that's a long answer to Jack. We don't really know how many staff are going to take us up on this. We have staff that have indicated that it would be an important consideration to them. The reason that number was we landed on that number was that one of the most important factors they identified in the survey was the cost of funding their insurance. $38,000 is the equivalent of about 2 years of insurance, and so this idea is pull 2 additional years of retirees into 1 year to try to clear that funding for those that are going to return the next year. So in other words, we would take, we would expect some teachers to retire anyways this year. What we're attempting to do with this is say teachers that maybe we're thinking about next year or the year after, pull them into this year to have a larger than expected retirement group to clear these funds.
So, Brian?
Yes, Mark?
Just a point of clarification. So this would be open to anyone 55 and older. So if someone were 60 and retiring, they would still have access to that number?
Yeah, the reason that the HR committee was identified that they have to be age eligible or 55 years old, Mark, is because of the relationship to their Wisconsin retirement system.
Sure.
And so yes, any teacher older than 55 by June 30th of this year could tap into this package, which again is specifically if you guys vote for it, would be a one-time offering, never expected to be offered again.
So if you're looking at 75% of 50-some people, you're looking at just under 40. If 40-some people took this, we'd be looking at about $160,000 that we would have to pay out if all 75% of them took it, which I would find doubtful. So at $160,000, if these 40 teachers take it, how much do we save?
On average, our cost of replacement, we save about $35,000 per teacher.
So we're breaking even.
Again, in one manner of speaking, there is a similarity between those two numbers, but they are different funds.
Right.
So Fund 73 can only be used for retirement benefits, and Fund 10 operational money is what we use to pay for compensation.
So we have an excess in Fund 73? Correct. That could take care of this. So in effect, we're moving $160,000 between the two funds, allowing you to spend more.
Much more than that. It's
Much
like
more than that. You're
1.6.
factor off.
Yeah,
Yes.
1.6 million.
1.6 million, Dave. Because you got 40 times 30.
40 times, okay, I'm sorry, 1.6 million, you're right. 4 times 40.
1.5 million.
At best, you're getting 1.6 million, which is about what we've spent on pay increases, or actually higher than we have in the past. So you could almost double the pay increase this year if all 40 of them took advantage of it. You're probably not going to get that. I would assume you're going to get something closer to half at best. So you're talking a good potential of about 2% increase in the pay increase, maybe. But here's my bigger question. We have a hard time replacing staff now. Are we going to have a super hard time replacing these staff who leave several years earlier than we were expecting, and we have a bigger rush that we have to try to fill this year?
I think it's a great question, Dave, and what I would say is that we are fortunate in that our ability to fill teaching roles is better than our ability to fill our hourly staff roles. We continue to be a very highly attractive teaching district, teaching position district. There are undoubtedly, there will be, again, within that, some positions harder to fill than others based on what those certifications are. But I can also undoubtedly say that I feel more comfortable attempting to hire that number of teachers than I would attempting, again, like we just did, to hire that number of hourly employees.
So on average, you know, you're looking at 40 people that are going to take advantage of this, and we got what, about 375 teachers. You're looking at over 10% of your staff that you're letting go. On average, what is our retirement? You know, so is it 3% of our staff retires?
3 to 5 is a very typical change over within staff, teaching staff. 5 would be on the high side, 3 is probably more typical. So again, I think the other part that the HR committee certainly discussed, and we've also discussed with the WTA, is that we recognize that it is not a great, it's not something we want to do, that we want to encourage experienced teachers to leave our district. This is an exceptional action to try to deal with an exceptional challenge. The value of experience is legitimate, and as a teacher, to lose that talent is something we have to recognize as a downside to the strategy. However, you know, we also have to recognize that compensation is extremely important to employees. It is a major factor in retention. It's a major factor in recruitment. We have to recognize that in this case, this is not an all upside suggestion. There are some absolute downsides to this potential solution. That is really the major one.
So it's probably kind of anecdotal, but I've heard like people in the profession, or from people that I know that are teachers, like if they're close to that age, they were this next year. I mean, there were a lot of retirements last year. This year they were going to retire. So not only were they going to retire, we're going to incentivize it and give them some money to do that too. I mean, that they probably would have done it without giving them money, is what my.
They're really, in fairness, Ted, I think that we will probably see additional retirements. It has been a very challenging 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't, unfortunately, a way for us to really accurately parse out who was going to retire and who was going to consider it beyond the data that we gathered. And what the data told us is, when we offered the survey, 3 teachers planned to retire this year. They said, I'm out. I know this is my year. Another 4 said, I'm going to go in the next few years, and then everyone else said unidentified, weren't able to identify it. And so That is absolutely a risk as well, that we're going to provide additional benefits to folks that were going to retire anyways. Part of the reason why some of this money is available is that this money is only paid out to individuals when they retire. If a teacher leaves the district before retirement, the funds that we don't pay out revert back to the general fund in Fund 73, and they're not identified for an individual. And so any teacher that has left before retirement has forfeited some of those funds back to the Fund 73. And so in some ways, the money that we would be using to pay for this incentive would be money that we would have paid to other individuals had they stayed and retired from us. And so, again, it's...
I just wonder what you do to the quality of education. You know, we've heard over the last year, it's the Waunakee way, and we've got the Waunakee teachers, and we work together as a team and so forth, and we're saying, you know, the people that are experienced, you know, we love what you did, thank you, we'll give you $38,000, you know, enjoy the rest of your life. What does that do, you know, to the culture of the buildings, you know, the overall, you know, because 10% of your workforce, that's a lot.
Well, I think some of it is, if they take advantage of this, they're on their way out anyway. I think people are burned out, they are tired, especially over the last 2 years. If somebody's close, I would rather have new, fresh teachers who are just starting or getting, you know, midway through 5 years, 6 years, something like that, to be excited about it. And I don't blame the ones that are ready to go, because it's been a frustrating 2 years. So, you know, and the end goal is to have money to be able to pay the other teachers their wages. I mean, we're just not giving them money to get rid of people. We're giving them an incentive to be able to pay and continue to pay the teachers that remain in the district.
$38,000 in an HRA account. That is, I mean, it's a significant amount of money and it's a great incentive, but that isn't going to help them live day to day. If they're only 55 and they've got to pay insurance and all the needs that they have until they reach a more normal retirement age, I don't think that we're going to get the pool of money or the pool of individuals capturing this. 40 people will not do it. You have to be ready to retire. That's a huge emotional, financial, there's so many components to retiring. $38,000 isn't going to do it. And not in that kind of, I mean, you're not giving them money. You're putting it in a kind of a deferred account that they can use in the future. And I also want to clarify, to take advantage of this, they first of all have to be in the district 15 years, correct?
To retire, the language the board put into place is that an individual can retire after age 55 and 1 year of service. The amount that they would be getting contributed to their HRA based on their service to the district would be 10% of a full 10 years of service. Okay. Someone isn't fully vested, if you will, in service in the district till year 10 and beyond.
I still think an important part is that your survey said about 75%, which was around 40, and they said that it's an important consideration. That doesn't mean it's enough to trip the trigger. Everyone, when you're looking at retirement, an important consideration is paying for your health insurance until you get Medicare. That's not going to be enough to say, just because I have health insurance, I'm able to walk. I think that's an important point, that 40 number is definitely the extreme end that you're not going to see. I would expect it's going to be somewhere closer to 10. You know, and while that still helps us to the degree of what this program is setting up, you're not going to see 10% of the teachers leave next year.
But to your point, if you're looking at maybe 10, that's $350,000
you still have 375 people, you know, we still have a big staff that we gotta figure out. It's not gonna cover the bogey.
It's one of many strategies, is that's part of what, I think as Steve presented things to the Budget Committee and HR Committee, it's kind of one of multiple strategies to try to figure out how we kind of put the pieces together for the next budget cycle.
It's frankly just really unfortunate that we have to come up with ways to create revenue to support our budget because our state refused to. I mean, it's just, that's where we're at.
So, I guess, Steve, what happens if this, you know, we don't approve this? How much strain does that put on the other areas?
I mean, as Randy mentioned, this is one of many strategies we're going to be bringing forward. Another one is open enrollment, which is tonight. It's on tonight's agenda. So we're going to continue bringing forward strategies, and really they're all under the theme of reallocation of resources. An increase in revenues is not there. So we're going to have to be looking at reallocating the expenditures that we're currently allocating in a variety of ways. Brian described this as a strategy, which is a perfect way to describe it. It is a fiscal strategy, one of many, if the board has a goal of ultimately freeing up in excess of over $1 million to put towards the compensation pay plans that were recently approved last year. So we're going to continue bringing forward strategies. Brian did a great job really articulating the financial impact of this strategy. This strategy uses funds that are in effect locked away in a post-employment benefit trust fund while freeing up funds in our general operational fund that can be used in any manner ultimately determined by the board. That's not the case with Fund 73. So funds that are freed up in Fund 73, as Brian referenced, when we have individuals who resign their positions and do not meet the years of service for full vesting, those resources come back to the district, but they cannot be used for things such as compensation increases. This is a creative approach to tap into those funds that have accumulated over the past decade, use those as an incentive for those who are really truly to retire anyways, pull ahead 1 to 2 years worth of folks who are considering retiring, free up the funds for the board then to determine what is the best way to reallocate those funds. We are looking to have discussions with the HR committee soon to really talk about strategies for compensation increases for July 1st. And the total scope of the financial strategies that we're going to be talking about with the board are really critical to how those discussions are going to be unfolding over the next couple of months. But I think the best way to describe this is just one of many financial strategies that we are looking to bring forward. And as you mentioned, Joan, we had a state budget that provided a revenue limit increase of 0, not only for 1 fiscal year, but for 2. We have ongoing expenses through pay plans that take over $1 million a year. So in that regard, we are going to continue bringing forward ideas, some that the board is going to be comfortable with and some that the board is going to ask us not to continue with, so that we can, meet those goals for the next fiscal year. We did talk about this topic with the HR committee over a number of meetings. There was requests for information, there were changes that we made that started out looking different than what you see tonight. We did talk about options of 1 year of insurance or 2 years of insurance. And the ultimate decision with the recommendation in front of you tonight was to try to seek a plan that would potentially bring teacher retirees 2 years forward, like Brian mentioned, from 2023 or 2024, to capture those savings fiscally this year to be able to reallocate them. Our hope is long-term that the state again funds public schools And we will not need a plan like this during those fiscal years. But of course, that remains to be seen.
So you need a motion for this?
I do need a motion if we're ready.
Motion to approve the retirement incentive for teachers as
Second.
presented.
Second by Mark, first by Dave. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppo- Opposed, say no.
No.
Jack and Ted were no.
And you got one more item, right, Brian?
So the second aspect of the retirement package is for hourly staff. This, I think, is maybe more accurately described as a combination of incentive and incentive to continue being employed by us, and a bit of a potential incentive for those that have met the amount of service to retire. The reason being, again, this is an option to offer to employees upon retirement that are age eligible, but based on years of service, someone would not receive the full $500 payment until they've worked for us for 10 years. And in our hourly employee groups, the majority of our hourly employees that are age eligible have not reached 10 years of service with our district yet. And so this, in a way, will allow us to try to incentivize them to continue working for us, related to a little bit of what Dave had asked about in terms of being able to hire individuals. It would keep them with us, but it also, the benefit brings our hourly employee groups in line with our salaried employees who do receive an HRA contribution upon retirement based on years of service, date of hire. Currently, the only HRA benefit that hourly employees receive is the value of their unused sick days is added to an HRA account for them. This would obviously continue that practice, but add to it an opportunity for them to be recognized for the number of years that they did work for us. The reason why the difference between teachers and hourly staff, with teachers we are trying to incentivize this retirement as much within the hourly staff. We want to recognize and reward those employees who have been with us for 10 years, but we really want to retain folks as long as we can. And this is, I believe, a very consistent recruitment and retention idea that would be well received by our hourly employees.
What's the average service life of the hourly? Do you have a feel for that?
It varies. What I would say, I think the best way I could answer that question.
Pool, what's the average?
It depends. And so what I would say is in our hourly employee group, our longest tenured group of employees is our administrative assistants. We have actually 18 of those individuals that have been with us, are age eligible to retire. 15 of them have been with us for more than 10 years. That is by far the most tenured hourly employee group that we have. And typically, the other hourly employee groups tend to be more in the 30 to 40% are at that 10-year mark or more. So the majority of those folks have not been with us as long as our administrative assistants.
Dave?
My only question, normally when you see things like this, there's a vesting period where you don't really receive anything until you have to hit the vesting period, because otherwise very short-term employees end up creating a problem for you over the years, because you have to go back and pay them a benefit even though they were hardly here and they show up years later. Does it seem like maybe we should go with a vesting period, like the first 3 years or so, and then start the percentages and maybe accelerate them more? Otherwise, you get somebody who's only been here for a year, yet we have to hang on to an HR8 form for how long?
Well, again, they have to be age eligible to retire, which is 55, which is also the age at which they can start to access those HRA funds.
So this would be that they have to be 55.
Yep, they have to be
And
eligible.
have that number of years.
Yeah, they have to have completed at least a full year, be age 55 to be deemed a retirement. Anyone that would leave without meeting either of those two would be a resignation, and this is only payable upon a retirement from the district.
How does this affect crossing guards or anything like that?
They are, again, would be employees that would be eligible to have this provided to them.
And it's not funded.
It's-
Like the teachers are funded, this is like an unfunded.
So this, and what Joan's meaning is that it's only paid upon retirement. So we're not, as a district, paying in advance.
Right.
We're only paying it upon completion of someone's 10-year career with us.
And this is also coming out of 73?
Yes.
If we're ready, I'd like a motion on this.
So just one clarification, I guess. So we start this year. So if you're working, you're building that up from today, even though you might have worked here for 15 years, or is it we're going back because you worked here for 15 years? You're paying for all those years of service as well.
We are. We're looking back, and so it would any staff that would want to receive this benefit has to work through at least the end of the school year. So that way, again, we're not in a position where we're having folks leave prior to the end of the school year. But after June 9th, any future retirement, regardless of timing, and our hourly employees have a different notification process. Hourly employees have to give 3-month notice to retire. Because again, different employment status, they're not contractual. So all of our contracted employees are tied more to a school year. Hourly employees have the opportunity to leave based on at-will status, but we ask for notification to consider them retirement. But it would be any retirement after the end of this school year would be able to participate in this.
But if I've been working here 15 years, this applies then
Yep,
after this
correct.
year.
Yep.
The part that I really like about this is it allows our hourly employees a greater share of an HRA similar to our staff, which we have been searching for and looking for years. So I applaud what you've done, Brian. I think this is truly creative and a great incentive to both stay and, if you're at that point, leave.
And I make a motion that we accept the retirement benefit for the hourly staff as stated.
Second.
Any other questions or discussion? All in favor of accepting this, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, say no. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Moving on to Policy Committee, we have kind of the 200 series, and I'm not sure, Ted or Randy, I do want to say in advance, we did receive a number of public comments tonight, and many of them were in reference to these policies, and I just want to acknowledge that for the people who wrote in. I should have acknowledged it during our public comment period. So, Ted or Randy?
Yeah, Randy, I'll let you
All right.
start off with the 200.
Sounds good. Just a little bit of background. What we have been starting over the last few years is a review of our entire policy book. And the way we've been doing that has been working with the School Board Association. Attorney Dan Mallon has been assisting us. His process was to, first of all, look at our existing policies and then look at it against kind of model policies that the School Board Association has put forward, and then giving us recommendations to either keep our existing policy, modify our existing policy, or replace it. And so in your documents tonight, when you see kind of the one that says this update 200 series Board of Education review, that's a document that Dan had put together. Rebecca put it into a little bit different format, but it really shows kind of a review of the entire 200 series. The next step that we did was, once we had that information, Rebecca and I went through it. Brian Grabarski helped a little bit on this section, and we also met with Ted as the chair of the policy committee, and we went through and looked at just some of the decision points that we had to make, because the School Board Association does give us kind of an and/or language for a few of the policies. Upon completion of that, it went to the policy committee, where we went through those policies, and that's really what's being forwarded to you this evening. I think your options this evening are certainly, one, to provide feedback on any of the policies that we could make amendments to, and then bring back at a subsequent meeting. We have traditionally kind of used the policies as a two-reading type process. Our policy allows us to do it in just one, so if there was a desire of the board, you could approve the whole series tonight. I guess I would say let's work on this as a whole series as opposed to piecemeal policies. I think that would be more accurate. So tonight, I think what we're looking for is any questions that you have on any of the policies, feedback on any of them. And I guess just from my recommendation, I'd probably look at this as a two read, and review them tonight, give feedback, let us take that feedback, and then bring it back in February for you to take action on. I think that just kind of makes sense, given the kind of the breadth of the entire series coming in front of you. But that's generally where we're sitting here tonight. I know that there were some public comments that were in relation to a few of the policies. So I guess at this point, I'm open to any conversation or questions or clarifications that you may have.
And I guess I could bring up really the main thing that was brought up by the community was regarding rule number 1 on policy 224. So 224 didn't really change from that was our policy that we had.
Yeah, it was.
And then the rule associated was kind of giving a little bit more direction with regard to the policy. And so the concern was specifically number 4, that the board will work with the superintendent to achieve a resolution to complaints, concerns, or controversies that may arise in a manner that is consistent with each other's respective roles and establish policies and procedures. Individual board members in particular have a responsibility to ensure that they are referring complaints, concerns, or controversies through appropriate channels and not attempting to investigate and resolve such issues in a manner that exceeds their individual authority. And so I take that as, as the board, we're the oversight. Are you waiting to get to it on there? Sorry.
But there's 224, so there's 224.1.
Keep going down.
Yep. So it's.
And at the end.
It's at the very end.
Little down.
This paragraph right
Number
here.
4. And I see that as issues that come up where, as the board, we're the oversight, and we give direction to the administration to take on and address some of these issues, and it's not really within our scope to do the investigating. We take your results, we review them, and if we see that that's not sufficient, we go further, and we, by all means, have a right to investigate it ourselves, but it shouldn't be our sole responsibility to do the investigation. That's how I read it.
I think it would just be easier to just stop where it says through appropriate channels, put a period there, and get rid of the rest of it. I mean, the main thing is that if something gets brought up, everybody knows what's going on so that it can be looked at. I think our role, in some cases, we end up being the final appeal process. And to say that not attempting to investigate and resolve such issues kind of undermines that final appeal process. Not to say we do it to start with or anything like that in any way, but to say that we do have some responsibility, even if that investigation is just the asking of questions of administration and things like that. But to say not to investigate seems to preclude that appeal process and absolve us of doing any actual questioning.
But does questioning mean investigate? I think investigate is a big, strong word there.
Yeah, but resolving such issues, we're not supposed to resolve them? And we're not supposed to investigate. If we're asked to appeal Randy's decision, there is some version of investigating happening at that point. I think the biggest concern is making sure that we're working with Randy, especially at the beginning, to say, here's what somebody brought to me, here's the way to get it into the proper channels and get it going.
Well, what,
But
by
not
the
to
last part
absolve
of
us of our ability to question and
Out of respect,
do reasonable research.
it's been my understanding from day one on the board that our role is not to investigate, but to make sure that the authorities responsible are doing the investigation. So if there's an allegation about a athletic situation, it's not our job to look into the actual details, but to turn it over to Brian Borowski and Brian or Aaron May and make sure that they are conducting a proper investigation of it. That's their responsibility, not ours.
I think it's a definitional question of the investigating and what level that happens at and when. I mean, if we're the appeal process, we can't just say, we turned it over to them, they investigate everything. Like, we've had parents come and question decisions. We have to ask questions at that point. I'm not sure that,
Well, then it's probably the last part of that.
it's like saying you will investigate is wrong also at all points, but then saying you won't investigate is also equally wrong.
That's why it adds it at the end, that exceeds their individual authority. So what is our individual authority on it?
It's so subjective.
And don't we respond as a board and not as
Correct.
individuals?
Correct.
So it has to come and be decided by the whole board, not by me
Absolutely.
coming up with information, I don't think.
Well,
As an individual, we have no authority.
No, I don't think so.
And I'm not sure that we have the training. You know, obviously, if something comes up, we can continue to question if we want more input. But that investigation is still going to come through administration, either Aaron May or through Randy or, you know, whatever Randy has delegated that to. So I think, you know, I really don't see a problem with this, and I don't necessarily see that we're giving up our ability to continue to question, because that's what we're doing. We're not investigating. We're not collecting facts.
Well, Dave had brought up a good suggestion. I mean, at what level does this happen? If we're saying something happens at the student level or at the staff teaching level, yeah, it goes through administration. Once something goes through the administration, who's doing that investigation or who's looking into an upper level?
Collectively, the board has to decide which way forward, but this is just stating individually, you can't go on. So we need
as
to,
individuals.
absolutely,
No.
absolutely, we need to, if this is something relating to that, obviously we can't pass it over to him. It's our responsibility to figure out what the plan forward is.
I think the one thing to look at is this policy is written about what are general rules and guidelines for good relations between administration and board. There's other policies that deal with complaints and deal with appeals. I mean, and we have had examples of families, parents, etc., coming to the board with appeals of decisions administration has made. You know, to me, this is kind of language that just talks about how we generally want to work together. But I don't think it negates anybody's ability for an appeal or for the board to ask questions with regards to investigations. I mean, if Ted were to bring an issue forward and say, I heard this in the community, can you look into it? There's been times when we've brought those things back into a closed session to say this was brought to the board, we did investigate it, and we brought that forward. So I don't think that negates your ability to do that or ask for that. I think the spirit of this policy is about working relationships, and there's other pieces of within our policy book that as we get to, you will also see kind of how do you address appeals and how do you address, let's say there was a concern against me, there's a policy about a concern against me, and then that goes to the board and probably like our attorney, et cetera, to work through that.
I mean, we've just focused on this. If we have any other concerns, I agree with, I think we should probably look at it, not take this as the first reading and.
Sure. What we can do with this one is we can have we have a policy committee coming up on the 26th. We can specifically look at this one and just bring that piece back. I would recommend we don't act on any of the 200s. We just can't do that as a whole group. But if there's things that you'd like the committee to think about with regards to this, I can just put this item specifically on our agenda. We can address it and talk about it from a committee perspective. I mean, one of the things that Dave recommended was to strike out starting after, I think you were talking here, Dave?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a piece we can talk about at the committee level and something that the board could think about of how that changes, I guess, the meaning and the spirit of the policy.
But looking at it from how do we work with administration, you know, I think by striking that, you know, we as a board can then, or we as individuals, you know, can go out and do an investigation. You know, what we're doing here is we're saying how are we as a board working with administration? You know, and I'm not sure that we want, you know, a rogue board member, you know, going and investigating and things like that.
But maybe we just need to spell that out, put a period there, and then make another sentence that might directly say, an individual board member will not attempt to investigate and resolve this issue on their own. You know, say it directly, because I agree, the wording here is kind of
Broad.
and interpretive and individual authority, and we just say what we want.
I mean,
The board member will not go out and investigate on their own.
I mean, you could almost use, I hate to say, the word investigate is just,
That's a
can be
hard-
questioning.
Yeah,
If a parent came to you and said, my student encountered this in school, and this is a real problem, I want you to talk to them. And then has that student talk to you, and you ask that student any questions, did you just investigate? I mean, I would have a hard time staring at a parent saying, I'm not gonna listen to your child
right.
because you didn't go through appropriate channels. I'm still an elected official, elected by that person. They have a right to talk to me. And to say, it just strikes me as extremely broad in using that word.
You know, I think
In the
one
same
of the
breath,
things that-
Dave,
Now, resolving such issues, I agree, that, no, you should not be doing that.
I think one
But I
of the
wouldn't
things
want
you
it
could
to chill
do,
a
though,
conversation.
is however, a board member can question administration,
Yeah.
you know.
in the
and that-
same breath,
That covers your,
Okay,
Alright.
Mark, go.
haven't we hired administrators and teachers and supervisors to be responsible for those situations? And if the call to the board member bypasses those options, aren't we letting our staff down and the whole process?
I think the referring complaints, concerns, and controversies through appropriate channels handles that.
Right.
But what doesn't, if we take the you know, and not attempting, if you pull that out of there, then
Then you have to define appropriate channels.
Right.
I
Which
think that's what
is
you're
what
talking
we
about,
could
Joan, is you want
discuss.
something in that last part that you want to be more specific to exactly what's been talked about. You don't want people doing this individually.
Right. I think collectively we agree it isn't an individual board's members, you know, it isn't in their authority to go out and investigate and resolve an issue. And if that's what we mean, then I think we need to state that.
Well, I think the other thing, if you want to add one sentence, you know, board members have the ability to question results of an investigation.
Right.
Or,
Right.
you know, so, you know, if the parent or concerned citizen comes to me, you know, I still have to go through the proper channels, but if I don't get the results that I want, then it's like, okay, what else can we do? So we're still doing our part, but there's limits on what we can do and what kind of information we can get.
Well, can we send it back to the committee and have them kind of rework what the ideas
Good
were?
luck with that.
I'd like a question, number 2, that the board should use its authority as a governing body to limit and diffuse actions by individual board members that contravene the will of the board. I don't understand how we can do that.
Right, and that was a question that the committee asked, and they asked me to look into it from a legal standpoint as far as what does that actually do.
Yeah.
There's really not a board could sanction a board member. You could, but it is really, all that is really a verbal communication as far as what your desires are as a board. There's really not a penalty that any board, that you can impose upon any board member. You can't negate them from voting. You can't negate them from being in their seat. You can just communicate the desire of the board as far as what their actions are.
So does this have any meaning in it?
It doesn't have a lot of teeth. It's really more of just a thing that
General
basically
sense?
states that if there's disagreements, that the board will.
Yeah, well, what?
I think part of it,
Well, you know,
it also looks at the board kind of governing themselves and not leaving it onto administration to govern the board.
Yeah, okay. I guess
That
when you
might
put
be
it in that
stated in
way,
there a
it makes
couple
sense. You're
different
talking about the relationship between the board and the superintendent.
Yeah, that's what it's, so it's kind of meant, well, like if there's a board member doing something that the rest of the board doesn't want, it's the board's responsibility to address that as opposed to administration's job to address it.
You're saying there are no penalties we could sit and impose and say, I mean, as a board, say, if you do this, well, this is gonna happen, we're gonna vote on it, and for this period of time, I mean, that's
No.
incorrect, and it's
No.
not.
You can
Wait for
basically
election day.
sanction somebody, but that would basically just be saying, we don't like what you're doing, we don't agree that that's the right thing, but you can't specifically stop somebody from, unless they start to bridge in, then you get into other things as like the ethics laws, et cetera. So if you get into egregious things, there's things you can do. But if somebody just practice-wise is doing something that there's not really a penalty that you can impose. Is there anything you want us looking at with regards to that? I think that was a question that I know that came up at the committee level for us to look into. So you can kind of look at those 2 bullet points at the committee
Yep.
level, Ted, and then we can bring that back. So, any other of the policies within the 200 section that really brought, that you want any clarification on? I think even at the committee level, this was the one that kind of had probably the most discussion, or majority of the discussion around. We had a few discussions around professional development, and that was really tied to kind of me reporting to the board, kind of my professional development plans. I think that was fine to put in there. So we kept those aspects of it.
Yep.
Otherwise, if nothing else, I mean, I don't have anything else to present here. I think it's one to take a look at. If something does come up, I just ask board members to reach out to me and seek clarification, and then we will bring these back through the board in February for your action, and we'll bring 224 Rule 1 back through the committee for discussion on those 2 items.
But we do have policy 187.
Yep, that's, yeah, another agenda item tonight is policy 187. This was the one, Rebecca, if you can pull that one up from, this was the one with regards to public comments during board meeting. We discussed it at the last meeting last month, and you had asked for us to bring back 2 options. The 2 options generally discussed that the differences between them are, do we allow public comments on any topic, whether it's on the agenda or not? Or do we select specific meetings where we allow for public comments on any item that's germane to the district? And then on general meetings, it's just for items that are germane to the agenda and have to be tied to an agenda item. So those are really the 2 differentiators.
I guess from my standpoint, you know, I like the second option. And, you know, if the community, you know, wants specific items, you know, where they have a challenge with specific items or how things are going, they still have the opportunity to email the board members. You know, and we've seen that over the last year, that and you know, those public comments that we get, you know, we historically reacted to those public comments. So, you know, if there's something happening in July, you know, that people are up in arms about, then I don't think we're really taking their voice away. You know, because they still have that opportunity to email us. And, you know, if they don't get satisfaction, you know, which I think this board has been very amenable to listening and reacting to things that the community has brought to us.
Dave?
I support the top one mainly because I think our biggest service to the community is as their elected representatives, listening to them. We already reimposed the time limits for how long comments can be made before the meeting. Quite often, the topics they bring up, they don't understand or may not notice what policy it fell under or what might be able to be done about it, but by them bringing it up, some of us can hear it and respond and be able to move it in the right way to get it going forward. Not everybody likes using email. I don't think we should limit them to say that that's the way to get a hold of us. The room here is open. They know we're here once a month. They're not always going to know if it's June, September, December, or March. I'm not sure where we are harmed by letting them do that. I do think we can harm them a bit by limiting their ability to talk to us. And I don't see, other than saving a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting, I don't see where there's a benefit to limiting them.
I think as long as we have the time limit, the first option is fine. I think the hard part was going for an hour or longer with public comments on things that we couldn't do with anyway at the meeting necessarily, but certainly if you've got that, I like Dave's idea that it at least brings it out to us in another format, be it email or in person. So keeping the time limit, I would support number 1. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with parts of it, every single one of you. The only thing that really hurts is if we have a 30-minute time limit and there are a lot of people that want to talk about the issues that we're going to talk about that night. Or, and yes, we can expand that, but if there are people that are taking their 3 minutes away from and talk about something that's it's on the agenda, it pulls a little bit of time away from the people who want to impact that meeting. And I understand we can expand it, but we can also say no, 30 minutes as well. But I'm fine with people talking about what they want. If it doesn't, I do want to get more things done in meetings that we have time to discuss, and so that's why I think we need to keep the 30 minutes, but if people want to talk about whatever's on their mind, that's fine with me.
Good.
And same, I think as I mentioned, I think the whole, as I got into this process and listening to the public comments, it seems strange to me that you can go on and on about something that we weren't gonna talk about at all at the meeting. So you could use that time differently, although I don't wanna limit their ability to tell us. We're getting emails from them anyway. As long as we have the time limit, I guess I'm okay with it. It just, there seems to be a better vehicle to express your concerns in a more timely, like you said, if we're talking about this and you have all kinds of people coming to discuss that, that's a whole different thing than, no, we're talking about this, but I got 10 people talking about something entirely different. I'm okay either way, I guess.
Yeah, I would think if the public wanted to get something on a future agenda, they should contact us.
Correct.
And,
And it
and talk to
shouldn't
us
be this
about the
meeting.
issue,
Right.
and then, try to get it on the agenda of
Correct.
future, but just coming and showing up with
I think our policy says that every board member can put forth agenda items. So if they want to get something on the agenda so that they can talk about it, and we can then react to that, that seems more productive. If you get people coming in here just kind of talking about whatever they want to talk about, I can't believe that they're frustrated because they're walking out of here and we can't do anything about it. And if we don't put it on a future agenda, their problem's not going to get solved.
well, hopefully this is an educational thing for them.
Right,
that now they'll hopefully know if they listen to this and people spread the word, that if they want something on the agenda that seems relevant, to talk to a board member by email or by phone first, and, but I'm fine with how it reads on, what is it, number 1?
Yeah, so the number 1 is the current policy.
Yeah.
Number 2 was a policy we had 2 years ago and previously.
I personally would like to see it open to anything. Again, we're limiting their time, they get 3 minutes. It's part of our job, I think, to hear them.
And we'll adjust as issues come up and we need more time to hear, then
Right.
we'll adjust to that.
And I think that we need to also make people more aware of what you just said, Brian, is how to get on the agenda and how to actually move topics to a discussion spot. Mark, any concerns?
No, I think it's been a good discussion. I'm comfortable really with either one. I think the big thing is that people need to be able to express their ideas about certain topics, and I do have some concern if we go with the second option that, knowing specifically which months they're allowed to have an open discussion versus a limited discussion, may fall on deaf ears.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure the first paragraph really doesn't benefit everybody the best.
I'd like to make a motion for the first paragraph.
And the rest of the whole policy?
Right.
Second.
Okay. Second. Any other discussion before we vote? All in favor of the first item up there as the policy, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And that's the end of policy, right?
Yep, end of policy.
Okay, moving on to facility, is there an action item? in
Yeah,
this?
facilities and budget both met. Many of their action items are actually listed below under administrative reports and action items, unless there's something that one of the board members wants to report out from those committees.
Okay, so we're all good to move to administrative reports, starting with open enrollment. Steve, I'm assuming you'll take this?
Yes, Joan, thank you. A couple things I just wanted to point out for members of the public who might be watching this. The information that we're going to be presenting on the number of open enrollment capacity recommendations for each grade level, there's a couple of exceptions that our parents and community needs to be aware of. The first one is if you are a resident of the Waunakee Community School District at this time and you move out of the district and apply for open enrollment, you are automatically approved to continue attending school here. So we may show grades that have a recommendation of 0 enrollment for open enrollment, but that does not mean that an existing Waunakee family cannot apply and be automatically approved. That's a part of our policy that we have adopted, the Wisconsin state law that allows that piece. A second component is that if you are a family and there is a sibling that you would be applying for open enrollment, the sibling will be automatically approved even if the numbers that you see approved tonight show a 0 for that grade level. That is a second component of Wisconsin state law that we've adopted in our policy. The third thing to keep in mind is that there has to be capacity both within the regular classroom and within special education. So if a student has an IEP, we first have to look to see, is there capacity in that grade? And then secondly, we have to look to see if there's capacity within the special education program. So you may see, as an example, a certain number of students being accepted at a grade level. If your student has an IEP, we also have to have space in special education. So Tiffany included some information in the packet so that you can see the number of special ed openings. That's a second review that we do after we first take a look to find out if we even have room available in that grade. So just keep that in mind. The second, what I'm also going to share with you is we do have some options for you to consider tonight that we shared last week with the budget committee. I'm going to open this up and show you a possible hybrid approach that was discussed last week at the budget committee meeting. And I'm also going to ask Amy Johnson to talk a little bit about 4K so that you can have 4K in your mind when you're making this decision as well. So on the left-hand side, we have the open enrollment capacity calculations based on the number of students that we had in our official DPI count this past fall. In the calculations to the right, those are based on the estimated new students that our budget planning model assumes for next fall. After discussing this with the budget committee, the thought was, let's use the calculations on the left for every school except the middle school, and let's use the assumption of growth of the middle school to use the numbers on the right-hand side. So that's a little bit of a hybrid approach that was discussed at the budget committee last week. You could either approve the calculation on the left, you could approve the calculation on the right, you could look at something in between. But I also want to just give Amy a chance to talk about the 4K situation in the community. The number of openings that we have identified for 4K at 22 is lower than what we've approved in recent years. So I just wanted Amy to have a chance to talk about that topic.
Yeah, as you all know, we have 4K in our community childcare sites and preschools. And as a result, a lot of families have relationships with those centers and have been going there since they have been infants in some cases. And so I asked the childcare sites, how many non-resident students do they have that they expect will be 4 and eligible for 4K in the fall? And they currently have 42 students at their sites currently. that would be age eligible for 4K. In our 4K centers, we would have room for 358 students next year. But of course, it doesn't matter that we have capacity at 4K. Ultimately, we need to have capacity in kindergarten because these families can stay. Many do stay, but not all. Some want to attend 4K just because that's where their child has been attending daycare and preschool in the past, and then they move to the resident district.
Thank you, Amy. So just keep the 4K numbers in mind. The 22 is a little bit lower than what we've done in recent years, but our census also indicates more students at those ages, resident students at those ages as well. So we're experiencing some growth in the numbers. So again, the highlighted in yellow was an idea from the budget committee members to take a look at on the left-hand side, the numbers in yellow, and the right-hand side at the middle school. We did talk a little bit at the budget committee meeting how at the middle school level, the reason we do have openings available is because this is based on class size. We have added teachers at the middle school as our enrollment has increased. We do have capacity using the optimal class size based on the fact we've added staff. However, given that, the budget committee felt like we should look at the numbers on the right, which assumes student enrollment increases at the middle school, and have a little bit more of a conservative number for 7th and 8th grade. That's why you see the calculations on the middle school being on the right-hand side, assuming growth. But the thought was on the left-hand side, as an example, there would be 2 openings in 2nd grade if we base it on the number of students that we had in our official student count. On the right-hand side, there would be 0. But the thing to keep in mind as board members, all of these calculations use what's called the optimal class size, not the maximum. So the projected enrollment has to be underneath the optimal class size. So in our board policy and class sizes, we have minimums, optimal level, and maximum level. So none of these calculations involve the class size estimates going above the optimal level and in between optimal and maximum. It's optimal or below.
Steve, a clarification. Is our estimated enrollment inclusive to include all of the kids that right now are doing virtual? And I know there's not many, but there's probably 10 out there.
Yes,
They're in that number.
Yes, we did share that information in a different format at the budget committee meeting, but yes, we do have a little less than 10 students.
But those numbers are in those
in grades. Yep.
Because they may likely come back to.
Yes, and they were included in the 3rd Friday count for those specific grade levels. So thanks for clarifying that, Joan. Those students are in the numbers already for their specific grade level.
So Steve, why don't you clarify, in 3rd grade, you get 2 open enrollments, or 42 or 48 open enrollments available. That's 2 classes.
Right, so great question, Jack. So what happens in our class size policy going from 2nd grade to 3rd grade is the class size increases. So in our board policy, we have a specific class size for grades K1 and 2, and then it changes in 3rd grade. So in 3rd grade, because the class size is higher than it is in grades K through 2, just the simple math would mean that additional students would be able to be accepted and still remain underneath the optimal class size, because when you take a difference of 3 students times the number of sections we have, going from 2nd grade to 3rd grade opens up a lot of spaces. Now, we will not have 48 applicants at 3rd grade. In the past, we've had less than 10. at a grade level, because that's not an age at which people are typically looking at considering changing schools. 7th grade is more common, 9th grade is more common. But the main difference that you would see, Jack, thanks for pointing that out, is there's a difference in the board's class size policy that impacts 3rd grade.
I think one of the things you talked about, that we discussed at the budget committee, is obviously we're not gonna get 42 3rd graders, we're probably not gonna get 8 4th graders, because those aren't areas where people are looking at moving. You know, I guess from my standpoint, I would prefer to just stay with the numbers on the right, and, you know, move forward with this year's projections.
And if I could just add, what Jack is referring to is what we have traditionally done. The numbers on the right has been our traditional process for open enrollment. We wanted to show you what the calculations would look like on the left if they were based on the actual student count from this fall. The numbers on the right are based on assuming student growth. So just keep that in mind. If your interest is what we have done in the past, that would be the calculations on the right.
The calculation on the right is a much more conservative piece. It's exactly as Steve said, what we've done in the past. The one on the left is just showing an alternative model, still within our board policy, creating a little bit more space where you could potentially generate some revenue through open enrollment. That's really the difference.
Is this one of the strategies that you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, as an example, on the left-hand side, there are 2 spots in 2nd grade. I'm sure those will be filled. Any open enrollment in student, the other district does have to pay our district for open enrollment. We would not add instructors for 2 students. So, you know, depending on your perspective, open enrollment is an opportunity for, you know, an increase in revenues. That's one of those areas that's outside of the revenue limit formula. After completing this exercise, there's not significant differences between the 2 calculations, so this isn't going to make or break, you know, our financial situation. But depending on your perspective, if you want to look at this as an opportunity to potentially generate more revenues, you might want to accept 2 2nd graders instead of 0. I think that's why the budget committee did take a look at maybe the yellow might be a path that the board might want to consider as well. More conservative in 7th and 8th grade, maybe a few more openings in the other grades on the left-hand side. It just depends on how you want to look at it.
How many do we turn away? And what, elementary, middle school, intermediate, every year?
So we're required to publish this information. So if you have an incoming kindergarten student and we've already published that there's 0 openings, we don't really know how many we're turning away because you wouldn't bother applying. So we will turn away 4K students with the 22. I mean, as Amy was referencing, that's for sure. We have gone up to 30. The one thing to keep in mind is you could accept more 4K students in the event that some of them choose to continue with us for kindergarten. We do have capacity at the elementary schools. So right now we have 14 sections of kindergarten. When you think of Arboretum being a 4-track school and Heritage and Prairie each having the potential to be 6-track schools, we could absolutely add a kindergarten teacher without a facility issue. So that's another opportunity if the board wanted to look at that 22 and say, reference what Amy brought up earlier, that number can be changed as well. And that would not cause an issue for the following year's kindergarten. And we typically have approved 30 4K students in prior years.
And it's what, about 7,500 per student
That's
on open
correct.
enrollment?
For 4K, it's seven.
Oh, that-
0.6 for 4K.
That'd be
Point
0.6.
six.
Oh,
but
0.6
that's the total.
of that amount. Personally, I would stay with what Jack said and do a more conservative. I think we've worked hard to get our student-teacher ratios more manageable. Our staff are overwhelmed with, I think, the catch-up that they're doing with the COVID situation and absences. I'm not interested, I would prefer not to add any extra kids that we don't have to have.
I guess I'd make the, you want a motion on this?
Mhm.
I make the motion to follow scenario 3.
I second.
Any other discussion? All in favor of staying with scenario 3, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Do we want to entertain the 4K or just stay with the 22?
I think we re-entertain it next year.
Okay, I'm good with that. All right.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, thank you, Amy. So facility planning, Mark is here. Always enjoy your updates.
Good evening. So I've seen most of you, but not all of you. I'm Mark Roffers. I've been working with the Waunakee District on enrollment projections and facility planning work for about 15 years on and off now. And it's nice to be back. I did have a presentation. I think it's like breaking Rebecca's computer right now. It's 50 pages long. I was going to make a joke that I was going to spend about 10 minutes per slide, but I don't think that'd be funny to anyone at this point. But what I'm going to do is talk quite a bit about the enrollment projections themselves and maybe some of the implications that I think collectively your team has observed, and then be able to circle back to the earlier slides if you have questions on them. Now, was I going to manage this, or?
You can give him the mouse there.
Yes, I've got the, let's see, where did that clicker go?
Here it is.
Thanks.
Is it working?
Or grab the mouse.
The one on the right?
You can just take the mouse one too, that'll work, probably a better way to do it. Roll forward. Right.
Very good. Okay, so as I was saying, there's a lot of information in here, as you probably saw, or you may have seen if you've looked at it. I'm going to jump right ahead to the projections and see if this works. Oh, look at that magic. This is an update for projections that I last did in 2017. A couple things have happened since then that have affected student enrollment, kind of up and down. So it was a good time to revisit them. You may recall that I was here in the spring, and we talked about as things sort of stabilized-ish this fall, it would be a good time to kind of revisit enrollment projections. And that's what we've done. So what is the bottom line? We are projecting between 2021 and 2035 an increase of close to 1,400 K through 12 students. That would bring the district total to about 5,500 students over that 14-year span. And if you want to break it down year by year, that's about 95 or so additional students on average per year for the next 14 years. It's not going to be 95 every year. There are ebbs and flows based on a lot of different factors, but that is the projected average. This includes both resident enrollment plus an assumption of open enrollment in continuing at prior levels. We took the average of the last 4 years and just used that number projecting forward. So our core projection is of resident enrollees. We just added that open enrollment total to the top of that in this particular round of projections. On the open enrollment out private homeschooling side of things, we assumed that would remain at a constant rate going forward. We didn't see anything in what St. John is doing or Country Day or other things to suggest it should be any different in the future than it has been recently. We don't include 4K enrollment projections. They're not, as was just mentioned, they're not in your school buildings, so that's the reason for that. I can't do this at home, find a good spot for this, and I won't be able to do it here either. And the projections in general, this is a similar pace that we did project in 2017. So we project enrollment by looking at different indicators of enrollment change within different neighborhoods of the district. A long time ago, we broke the district down into 50-some different neighborhoods. They're based on subdivisions and other common indicators of where a neighborhood would start and end, and they don't cross elementary attendance area boundaries. So this map just shows the breakdown of our projections by neighborhood, and you can see some of the hot spots in the warmer colors, in terms of projected K-12 enrollment growth. Westbridge in the upper left or northwest side of the village, Arboretum Village and potential expansions to that north of Arboretum Elementary. Heritage Hills, a new arrival on the scene, Viridian Homes development north of 19. And a development we expect will break ground between the intermediate school and Kilkenny Farms. We're calling it Kilkenny West. So again, this is for over the next 14-year period where we see the most significant enrollment growth, pretty closely correlated to where we're projecting to see significant housing unit growth, particularly single-family housing growth. We broke our projections down by grade group and by school attendance area for the elementary schools. So of that total that I had in the previous slide, we're projecting about 600 to 650 being K-4. And that's among all three of the elementary schools under the assumption that there's no building. And then we'll talk about how that could work and why it can't going forward. Through the 2020s, we're projecting that most of that increase would be within the heritage attendance area. That's where we expect most of the near-term housing unit development. And that was by design. In the last set of attendance area adjustments, we anticipated that growth. Heritage has excess capacity, especially with its build-out potential that I think the board has discussed before, and we can discuss a little bit more in the future. And at least in the facility planning efforts that went back to 2014, the anticipation has been that the fourth elementary school, when it's needed, would be further south, thereby absorbing some of Heritage's and potentially Arboretum's current attendance area. But with this number, 639, capacity issues would emerge at the elementary level by the mid to late 2020s without a fourth elementary school building. And that may be a surprise to some, but it was what we anticipated back in the 2014 facility planning effort in advance of the referendum. This table has a lot of information on it. Let me give you a brief tour. It's projected enrollment by elementary school. Each of the three elementary schools are listed on the left. Their September 2021 enrollment in the first numerical column, and then our projections for different years, 2 years out, 4 years out, and then 2030 and 2035 school years, and how that change may play out over time. The capacity numbers are based on the class size policies that Steve laid out earlier, and represent a range of functional to maximum capacity for each school. Where you see the numbers get yellow or amber, that's indicative of a projected enrollment that's in that capacity range. And where you see it red, that's a projected enrollment that's above the capacity range. So you can see, clearly capacity issues emerging across the schools between that 2025, 2030 time frame. A few points in the bullets. This doesn't assume any transfers between the elementary schools or among them. Occasionally, especially with respect to Arboretum, there just is not capacity in that school come summertime for incoming kindergartners, so those students are asked to attend Heritage or Prairie. And in recent years, that number is there's actually been transfers among the schools, not necessarily all from Heritage, but or all from Arboretum, but that's not included here. So, if there were net transfers out of Arboretum, continuing that 2023-24 number wouldn't be quite so high. And then the second bullet point to point out is that we have a heritage capacity of between 627, 696, a full six section elementary school. That's achievable only if there's additional classrooms remodeled in the former intermediate school space to allow that to happen. So, if we look at the projection short term, we see, relatively significant heritage growth. But as you look at the longer term projections, really across the board growth as new neighborhoods emerge in different attendance areas. We're representing the same information in a graphic form. Some of this didn't translate well with the change in format, unfortunately. But just to ground you a little bit without losing track by looking at the numbers, the information in gray is the total combined capacity under that functional capacity number. And if you look at the gold bar, that's adding up to get to the maximum capacity. So that's ranging from 1672 to 1856 if these numbers are reading correctly. And yeah, the light's blocking it, but trust me, that's the number. So you can see this graphically, the challenge emerging. The black line represents the resident enrollment projection, and the red dashed line represents the resident plus open enrollment, assuming constant open enrollment in. So you see you getting into the amber zone in the mid 2020s. I'll figure this out eventually. Okay, here we go. And this map looks the same as the last map I had up, but it's not. It's showing the projected K4 enrollment growth. So this just shows graphically where we'd expect more, and in limited cases, fewer elementary school students than today. So, a couple points to kind of keep in mind when you look at a map like this is that we're looking at not only housing unit growth in these cases, but we're looking at areas that we would expect significant turnover of existing houses over our projection period, particularly as we go forward. So areas like Southbridge are not going to have any new housing units. Areas around the elementary school in Savannah Village, no new housing units, but we would anticipate, a fairly significant turnover of families that move there around the year 2000 over our projection period, releasing those homes to new families. So a continued churn of housing units in those areas, and so kind of a convergence of new housing construction still occurring and occurring at higher levels, as you saw some, if you looked at the earlier slides of the presentation, combined with significant turnover of, the go-go years in Waunakee between 1995 and 2005 when 100 plus single-family homes were being built each year. At the intermediate school level, these are the projections, about 240 additional 5 through 6 students, again, over the next 14 years. That would bring the intermediate school total to about 880 kids. That would exceed the functional capacity of the building as it's currently built. But the intermediate school capacity number that I'm showing does not include an anticipated future classroom addition, which, if completed, would address projected enrollment at the intermediate school through about 2035. So that was always part of the program there at the intermediate school, was that there was room to build additional classrooms. And then, boy, the numbers really got messed up on the translation here. Sorry about that. This is almost useless, unfortunately. But this would have shown that graphically where the capacity problem emerged at the middle school level, and it trust me again, and look at your other version. Hopefully, it's clear in your versions.
It is.
Okay. And that it's the late 2020s where we got an issue with the current intermediate school, but if that classroom addition is built, that buys you several more years on that building. Middle school level, it's been obviously the significant topic of conversation over the last several months to years. We're projecting about 230 additional middle school grade 7 through 8 students, to a similar number to intermediate school. The challenge there is that's 200 plus students over the capacity of the middle school. There is kind of a bifurcated sort of middle school growth pattern. Given the class sizes that are relatively smaller below it, we wouldn't expect middle school enrollment to really skyrocket over the next few years, but certainly increase. Then after that, we'd expect it to grow for a variety of factors. Bigger, younger grades. Steve mentioned, a lot of kindergartners coming in due to growth, 4K, that kind of, eventually it's going to bubble up and they'll become 7th and 8th graders. We have housing unit growth that I talked about now. We did a survey of folks that were buying and building new houses in Waunakee and Westport. And we found that most of them bring in little kids, as to be expected, preschoolers and kindergartners. But we do have those new houses bringing in a fair number of 5th through 8th graders as well. So as we continue to see that growth, as an earlier slide in the presentation suggested, we're well over 100 new single-family homes in 2021 in the village of Waunakee for the first time in many, many years. So we'd expect that to emerge and grow into new kids. And then that phenomenon that I'm anticipating, that significant turnover of the, it's hard to call them older, but the housing units that are now 16 to 26 years old that were built in that period of time, but are eminently suitable for families and neighborhoods that are appealing to them. And then this is the unfulfilling middle school chart. But you can obviously see in the board's version of it that the capacity issue exists today. And I'll just kind of maybe turn over the conversation a little bit to our colleague at Epstein and Chris, who's going to talk a little bit about their efforts to refresh the middle school capacity numbers. We thought it was a good time to revisit the capacity of that school relative to the focus that you all have on that particular issue. So,
thanks, Mark.
You bet.
Hi, everyone. I'll keep this brief. This past fall, in anticipation of the enrollment projections being redone, the district asked us to verify the capacity at the middle school and if there was anything that needed to be changed or updated to do that, so we could assist Mark with the enrollment projections. So we did go through and do that. We met with Steve, with Jeff, and Tim, a couple of meetings in order to understand how the school is being used, what has changed since the last time we did a capacity and utilization study at the facility, and what the new numbers look like. We calculated the capacity in 3 different ways. We used what's been discussed here this evening, the district policy numbers, so the optimum numbers for class sizes. We also calculated capacity based on the size of the learning environment. So the first one, the policy, is essentially a teacher to student ratio. The second one is the actual physical space of a classroom or a learning environment that allows a teacher and students to function in that area. You need so much space in order to do so. And then the third was just a basic metric of taking the gross square foot of a building and dividing it by a metric that's commonly used. We also did a utilization analysis. So one of the things is to understand the capacity. How many spaces in your building are being used for instruction? What does that translate to the amount of capacity for your building? The utilization analysis looks at how each of those spaces are being used. So for instance, if you have a classroom in your facility, is that classroom being used all 8 periods of the day? Is it being used 1 period of the day? And is there room to better utilize that space? And then the other part of the utilization analysis is looking at each one of those classroom spaces for each period of the day and understanding how many students are in that classroom each period of the day. So if a lot of times we might hear, oh, we're at capacity, our classrooms are full, there's somebody in this classroom 8 periods a day. We do an analysis of what that looks like every period, and if we see that there's 2 students in that classroom all 8 periods of the day, we would suggest that there's probably a different space in the building for that small group as opposed to taking up a whole classroom. So we're looking at how many spaces are being utilized and how well they're being utilized. Let's see here. A couple things to note. We calculated the capacity for the building on its own. We also have a separate capacity for the portable classrooms outside. We wanted these 2 things to be separate because the ideal situation obviously is not using portable classrooms. And then we're also just balancing things against the current enrollment from September, which is 652 students at the middle school. We found that the capacity of the middle school went from 672, which was previously the capacity for the building, to 663 students. So the capacity dropped about 9 students, so relatively not much change right there. And that could be for maybe there are additional services that are being offered at the facility that don't count towards education spaces such as special ed, or maybe additional staff that are taking up different space. You had the 2 additional portable classrooms added this past year, which might be, displacing some of the instructional spaces to the portable, alleviating room in the building for other services. This is the way the building's operating now. Capacities are always based on how you use a building. So that's what it is now. But I can assure you, looking at the utilization of the building, and how much the classroom is being used, that you are at a tipping point, I would say. Your spaces are being utilized, almost every instructional space is being utilized more than 75% of the time. So if you think of a 8-hour period day, 6 periods of the day at a middle school level is what you want to see those spaces being used, and nearly every space is being used north of that, okay? And then we looked at how many, on average, students are in a classroom. So your optimum is 25 students per room, essentially, and you're right around 21 and a half students per room. So essentially, if you took the students from the portables and put them into the middle school, you'd be essentially at 25. So the school is at capacity, obviously. The portables allow you a little bit of breathing room for scheduling. I think you probably would have challenges with your curricular offerings and not having enough spaces to offer those if you didn't have the portables, or something would likely suffer for that. For instance, maybe some of the services you offer begin to take very odd locations in the building because you don't have any other space. A couple just parting notes. Your cafeteria, as I'm sure you're well aware of, is jam-packed. The table layout in there is incredibly efficient. I would equate it to probably the most efficient way you can lay out a cafeteria. It's very similar to Army barracks style. Which, it's efficient, but I mean, you don't have room to make it more efficient, right? So you're at a point there, and that's operating at 3 periods per day. So I don't think your schedule actually works if you add a 4th period, or students are really gonna suffer with regards to lunchtime. Your gym is almost at capacity. You're using it 7 out of the 8 periods a day, with around the maximum number of students you typically have in a gym for that. So you have about 50 more students before you need to find more PE space. And as you look at potentially that number of 21.5 students per room, as that begins to creep up to 25, the optimum level, keep in mind that the 25 level is the optimum. You never will be able to schedule every single class at that number. There's always going to be some classes which go above and some classes which go below, hence the maximum. The thing which makes it difficult at the middle school is your classrooms are typically a little bit smaller than a typical classroom. So whereas if you look at 30 square feet per student as a general metric, your classrooms at the middle school typically can seat about 25 to 26 students in that area. So as that 21.5 number pushes up, there's going to be classes that approach 30 students if they don't already, and that will become pretty uncomfortable and probably not as functional in those classrooms that we have there. That's all I have today. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to entertain some. Otherwise, we can continue back with the projection presentation.
As Chris was talking, I brought up the slide that you now see that shows the middle school projected enrollment in the red relative to that new capacity calculation on the far right. I jumped over the top of the high school projections. You see an anticipation that high school enrollment will be relatively flat over the next few years as big classes graduate and are replaced relatively in kind. But that number increasing as some of these factors that I talked about earlier start to bubble up to the high school level in the 2030s. So we talked a little bit, just I guess in summary first, the housing market here is strong and it's diversifying in a way that should attract more families and buffer lower expected birth rates. You might have seen in the earlier slides, the number of live births in Waunakee is remarkably steady. That suggests the birth rate's going down because we have more households, more housing units. But we also have, with the Viridian project and with Tierney's latest developments, some housing that kind of fills a lower gap in the housing market. I hate to call them affordable, but they are more affordable than what has typically been built in Waunakee. I'd expect that range of neighborhood turnover as actually the rate was about 150 single-family homes per year in the early 2000s as those homes start to turn over to new families in mass. And that should result in enrollment growth at all grades by the late 2020s and approaching capacity at the elementary and middle school, if not already there very soon. We talked a little bit about some of the implications. I think this is probably a springboard for any questions tonight for further conversation at a later meeting. How does this relate to facility needs? Well, in the short term, I'm anticipating that some of the new housing growth plus accelerating turnover near Arboretum will increase the stress at Arboretum Elementary School over that period. And so there probably is going to be a need for a short-term response to that, whether it's more in-district transfers or some other solution. If the district were to increase capacity at Heritage, such as by remodeling additional former classrooms from the old intermediate school, and do something with the middle school to add capacity, that could defer facility needs for a couple years at those schools, but it really, those decisions should be taken in the context of a longer-term plan if they were to be considered.
Mark, there's a lot of apartments being added think in the past you said that really is not a strong indicator of more students, because students in the apartment buildings are maybe 10% of the apartments, Mike. Have you taken that into account in these projections?
Yes, and I will say, you know, not every apartment development is created equally. So we looked at the number of bedrooms, the projected rents, to indicate, you know, how many students we'd expect to come out of different expected apartment developments. So for instance, we know from experience in other districts that is true. There's a more affordable apartment building in Middleton that was built over the last few years, and it generates between 0.4 to 0.5 students per housing unit, whereas a typical apartment building geared to empty nesters and millennials will generate, you'll need 20 apartment units just to get one student in your school. So it does matter, and we try to factor in that difference. Projecting the need for significant capacity expansions.
Just to build on that.
Well,
just
sure.
One second. Heritage Hills, there's what, 200 units going up there?
That's correct.
Is that the more affordable?
No, it's a market rate, and it's more in the range of the typical, although they might tilt a little bit more to 2 bedrooms than some of the other units that we've seen. So, for instance, I can't remember the exact assumption I made, but I think I was somewhere in the 0.2 kids per housing unit for those apartments, as opposed to 0.1 for the other ones on Main Street that have been built recently.
And then you've got that other housing unit going by Piggly Wiggly. That's what, a 50 unit?
50 units, and I've assumed a ratio more in the 0.4 to 0.5, because that is specifically geared to families. So the bottom point was probably my greatest point, but it got cut off. And so the idea was that if you were to pursue a referendum for November of 2022, and it was successful in adding building capacity from the amount of time from November 22 until when you could build that capacity, particularly for a middle school, would get you right around 2024, 2025, when these numbers got or stayed more in the red. So I think that's something to think about, particularly as you move forward with your thinking on facilities, that it's not, as quick as snapping your fingers and then the school is available. It takes quite a bit of time, particularly as you get to the upper grades. And I'm not the expert there, but I know that to be correct. And then the final thing I'll offer is that it may be time to, and I think you're doing this informally, but to consider more formally updating the 2014 long-range facility plan. It laid out steps that I think we're still feeling are going to be necessary in this period of time: a new middle school, a 4th elementary school. The 2014 plan did suggest adding additional classrooms to Heritage. I know you're talking about whether that's still advisable or not, given the different options for Heritage, including a potential different location for Heritage and rearranging schools. One of the observations that we'll offer to you is, if you do that, that's not your 4th elementary school. That's your 3rd elementary school relocated. So that would imply by the middle end of the 2020s, if you went in that direction, you'd actually need 2 new elementary schools, one being a replacement to Heritage and one being a brand new one to take care of enrollment growth. So as you think about those options, keeping that in mind is probably a big thing. So that's what I have to present, and I know this probably stimulates a lot of thought and ideas, but I'll turn it back over to Randy and Steve to coordinate the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think part of what our intent was tonight was really to start to bring some of the plans together around the numbers. I think that was the piece that we really we need to have what Mark presented tonight to give us a picture of kind of what our needs are, what are the staging of those, how does the elementary numbers coincide with our needs at the middle school as well. I think what you're going to see next is really us kind of talking about some of the financial pieces which I think dovetails well with the information that we have here. And then that's going to lead into us having conversations as a group with regards to what are some of the different options that we have moving forward. It really doesn't change the things that we already have on our table, but it definitely changes some of the questions and puts forth some questions and frames up our survey that we take to the community coming up here this spring, that we can then vet out so that we can have a decision on really what direction we'll go with the November referendum by the summer. So we've got this is kind of the beginning of kind of our deep dive into the work that we have around the referendum. The first piece is obviously these numbers. If you're interested in where some of this stuff came from, the front part of Mark's presentation really gives his how, and his results were really what he focused on this evening. But are there any questions for Mark while we have him in the hot seat here tonight? He always does a great job for us and does a nice job pulling these things together. So. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Mark.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
So next on the agenda is the PMA cost projections to help us finance our needs.
So we do have Eric Cass joining us. So Eric just appeared on screen via Zoom. Hello, Eric. Welcome to the meeting. So last week we had a back-to-back facility committee and budget committee meetings, and we were intending to share information about an example financing plan. We did that during the facility committee because we had both board members at the same two meetings, so we did it once. Eric walked through a example referendum financial plan. We do have that in the packet as well, but we did get some feedback from the board members on that topic, and we spent quite a bit more time last week working on refining that. So Eric's going to first talk about what we consider draft one, which we shared with the committees last week, and then he's going to share some refined work that we did after that meeting last week, just to give you some information about what really is the realm of the possibilities when we're looking at a referendum for this November. And keep in mind, what Eric was doing was constructing plans all based around the concept that the board has been discussing, which is a consistent tax rate across fiscal years. So keep that in mind. When you take a look at the plans that Eric is presenting, that was a fundamental piece of what he was working on, was trying to fit these plans into that concept with looking at the board's plan to pay down debt, which was approved this past fall, and then going from there. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Eric's going to touch on first what we shared last week, and then he's going to touch on the work that we have been doing since the last committee meeting, and we're going to share that as well. Eric, can you see the screen? It looks like we can't hear Eric right now.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss the potential November opportunity for operational and capital referendum. What you're seeing here on the screen, like Steve alluded to, was what we put together kind of first blush for the facilities committee. This is a very, not knowing a lot of the different touch points and pieces that the committee was interested in, we really just tried to back ourselves into first prioritizing this column that's called recurring operating override. One of the things Steve asked us to do was to look at the comprehensive impact of an operating referendum that would be considered recurring, as well as secondary, what would also be available for a potential capital referendum. So we first looked at that phasing in of that 1.2 million that increased all the way up to 6 million in 2026, 2027. And then after we looked and put assumptions around that, we then input that middle box and kind of backed our way into with a one-issue borrowing, which I'll touch on as we kind of dovetail into the updated financing plan here in a second. what could the district consume from a capital referendum? And at that point in time, we were projecting 75 million. Very vanilla approach, really targeting that $3.50, which to Steve's point is kind of that overall macro view from the board's perspective on managing to that mill rate. So this is just kind of encapsulating what the district has been levying for their current debt service, as well as some additional funds to begin paying off debt a lot faster to manage to that $10.89 that Steve had talked through. The feedback we got from the committee was they wanted to look at some further options. One of the major ones that I'll show you here in the updated plan is when you go for a larger capital referendum, which we're going to show you, there's no reason that you're going to borrow it all in one fell swoop. I know that many board members that have gone through this in the past have kind of gone through my predecessor, Michelle, educating them on the value of chasing a very quick borrowing up to 10 million for bank qualified, which is certainly a strategy that we would look to do, as well as construction for new buildings and renovations doesn't happen instantaneously. So multiple phases of projects align themselves to the ability to borrow in multiple years, and we'll show you the reason why that's advantageous on the next financing plan. The next piece that we looked at updating was the equalized valuation. So in this look right here, the first blush, we had a 3% value growth from 2022 through 2026, and then that flattened out to 0%. I can tell you that pretty much every client we work with really encapsulates their equalized value within the first 5 years based on an assumption of where they want to go, and then they kind of back off the gas a little bit. What we're going to show you is a different approach to that with the feedback from the facility committee and kind of show you how that kind of interplays with the repayment as well as the management of that mill rate. And the third thing that we looked at doing was to include the reduction in your overall levy due to your non-recurring referendum actually dropping off. So the concept being this recurring operating override, which is a new concept for a potential future referendum, at 1.2 million increase, would replace the current 2.1 million in change, which we'll show you on the financing plan, going away in the future years. So that 2.1 would help offset some of that operating levy coming on from that other strategy. I'm going to flip to the other financing plan at this point.
Yep.
A lot of numbers, which I apologize, but when we start to kind of navigate our way through multiple borrowing, phasing in and stuff like that, we tend to stretch from left to right, unfortunately. I'd like to take a moment for those folks that weren't on the facility committee just to kind of ground ourselves in actually what we're looking at here for just a quick second. So what you're seeing here from left to right very quickly is the first column is your Fund 39 existing debt service. So that starts with 7.2 million. That's the dollar amount that your current outstanding debt obligations, principal and interest, would require you to levy in that calendar year. So that 7203 kind of goes all the way down, and you see that it decreases over time. It decreases over time due to your speeding up the repayment of your debt with some additional levies in the past, as well as building in some what we call ledges for bringing on future debt. The next column, that example Fund 39 impact of the 22-23 defeasance. Defeasance is paying off debt early that isn't callable. So the first number is that 4.8 million. That's what the district levied additional beyond the 7.2 million required this last November to help again manage to the $10.89 mill rate. So there's an additional 4.8 million that we're building a strategy around, which you will see in the coming months once we kind of work with Steve to finalize the approach based on further feedback to help pay off some outstanding debt more quickly. Then an assumption is that that additional levy would continue into November of 2022 or the 22-23 school year. We see that 6.3 million additional. That's not a final number, that's just a projection at this point, just to kind of get the conversation going for a total levy that would go from 12 million, that third column, up to 13.5 million. One thing to highlight is the value of those additional levies as we project them here today, and again, this will change as we finalize that defeasance strategy, is that additional levy of roughly 11 million is going to save at the bottom line there projected up just short of $2 million of future interest costs. by paying off that debt more quickly than was originally intended when it was issued. So that just kind of shows you at a high level some of the value associated with paying off your debt more quickly as you're managing that mill rate and levying a little bit more into Fund 39. What you see in the middle here is the amortization, or kind of a draft preliminary amortization for a potential $150 million facility capital referendum. What we did here, a little bit different, is we broke out in that first initial financing plan that was shown to the facility committee, as I alluded to, one $75 million issue was done and we paid over 20 years. What you're able to do under Wisconsin law is you're able to issue debt for a period of up to 5 years after a successful referendum. So if you pass a referendum in November of 2022, you have the authority to issue whatever number is approved for a period of 5 years in any calendar year increments that you so desire. What we have laid out here is 4, so we're not taking advantage of the full 5, which we think, in getting some feedback from Steve, aligns to a potential construction schedule associated with what projects would be done with $150 million. And the real advantage to this versus issuing all at once, you'll see, when you look at the $40 million, that's amortized up to 20 years, because under state law, you're able to amortize or repay that debt for a period of no longer than 20 years. And you can see by going from calendar year to calendar year, you're able to go out an additional year. So that second $40 million issue allows you to go out into the 2043-44 fiscal year. Conversely, or next, you look at the third issue, you get out to the 2044-45, and then finally the $30 million gets you up to 2045-46. So really, it stretches the repayment from 20 years up to 23 years. So those impacts of that additional debt are out a little bit further into the future. It's a very good strategy to use at this point in time. The way interest rates are extremely low at historically low points, you're not carrying tons of interest. But again, we're assuming that 3.75 would be the same for all of those right now. Obviously a lot less right now, but we're talking 4 to 5 years out as well. Getting outside of the box, then, what we're looking at is your Fund 39 debt levy existing plus new. So that column looks at the new debt, which in this example is $150 million, as well as the Fund 39 existing debt service, which we covered over on the far left, because you will still continue to have some debt outstanding, even with the new debt coming on for a period of time. And so those dollar amounts are kind of that column right there, this the first one outside of the box. And then, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, we're bringing in the concept of the non-recurring operating referendum, no longer having the taxing authority associated with that, beginning in that 25-26 school year. If my eyes are treating me correctly, it might be the 24-25. Steve, you could help me out there.
It's 29.
The next column is then, again, that concept that we talked a little bit about in the first financing plan, which is $1.2 million of operating revenue coming on beginning in the 22-23 school year, and ramping up to a total of $6 million that would continue in a recurring basis. The column next to that is we always take into consideration the state aid impact. So as you're potentially spending more, there's an aid impact. So currently the district is negative 7.01%, which is footnoted at the bottom. So for every dollar you spend, you in theory lose 7 cents. Now that's going to shift over time, but we compare that to the base and take that into consideration. So unfortunately, Waunakee spending more at this point in time could cost you more in the aid formula. But again, that's going to evolve over time. A lot of that will fit into property value growth in the future and student growth in the future and things of that nature. The last thing that is a little bit hidden is we built out, and it's footnoted, we changed our assumption for your equalized valuation growth. So the feedback we got from the committee is that they didn't want to be overly aggressive, but they didn't feel like 3% for the first 5 years was appropriate. And so we went back and looked at the history of equalized values for Waunakee School District. And pretty much on every metric that we looked at a 5-year trend, a 10-year trend, and a 20-year trend. They're all above 5%. I think the lowest one was the 10-year trend, which was at 5.11%. Over the last 5 years, it got up to 7.12%. And then your 20-year was about 5 3/4. So what we did here is we looked at half of your amortization, so roughly the first 12 years out of the 23 for the new debt coming on. We assumed a 3% property value growth. And then after that, 2034 and thereafter, you'll see that that went to 0. What that does in essence is allows us to get all the way to the right and manage to that $3.50. You can see it actually drops at a period of time and kind of flattens out at $3.45. But again, kind of fitting that methodology that Steve asked us to do around maintaining that flat mill rate. The one thing that it's important to point out when you think about increasing your equalized value and managing to a mill rate, you'll notice in the first column outside of the box under Fund 39 debt levy existing plus new, for a period of time, that 3%, you're going to see that your required levy is going to be increasing over time. So it kind of starts in, there's a year where it's 10.9 million, it drops to 10.1, and then you're going to see it continuously increase until it flattens out at 12.7 million. So that's kind of the inverse relationship when we think about the assumption around property valuation. And when we normally build debt schedules, within that first 5 years, you'll see the levy increasing, and then it will flatten out, maintain that 0%, and maintain that mill rate that's flat at whatever it's going to be. In this case, that increase just continues a little bit further into the future versus what we would normally do in that first 5 years. So I just wanted to point that out because that's kind of the inverse relationship to that increased equalized value assumption and how you would repay the debt that kind of would be issued, again, within that box at $150 million with the capital referendum were to move forward and be approved. Would that be happy to answer any questions or take any more feedback like we received at the facility committee last week?
One thing, if I could share, is the first actionable step in what you're seeing in the financial plan is the debt service defeasance, or paying down debt. I did discuss with Eric that might be possible at the February board meeting, might be possible at the March board meeting. So we're going to dive a little deeper into that over the next couple of weeks. But that's the first item that you would describe an action step in putting a plan like this in place. Over to the far left, Eric talked about the interest rate savings under the debt service defeasance plan. And so last fall, when the school board adopted a tax levy and a plan to keep the tax rate consistent, we knew back then that we would be taking this step in the spring of paying down existing debt. So that will be coming fairly soon, in the next couple of months, and we will begin the process of actually taking the steps so that a plan like the one that you see here could occur in the fall. The other thing to keep in mind is these are both example plans that look at a variety of estimates, and it could fall anywhere in between. If the board lands on a plan that's $100 million, it would land in between. It would look a little different than this. We wanted to show you a $75 million referendum to show what that would look like. And then based on the feedback from the board members, we dialed in a little bit more, showed some more details on this plan. But please don't look at either of those two plans as the plans that we're suggesting. It's anywhere in between, depending on how this process works itself out over the next few months during the dialogue. But just be looking for that first step in the paying down the debt. Any feedback to share on that, Eric, that the board members should be aware of?
No, but I think you would kind of share exactly our conversation. So that defeasance can happen anytime. It just needs to be approved if the board is interested in moving forward with that strategy before the end of the fiscal year, so that it kind of happens before that June 30th deadline. Other than that, you pretty much have as much flexibility as you need and approve that at a regular board meeting.
I think the one takeaway from this is that as we start looking at our plans and the directions that we want to go and start vetting things out with the community, we do have a lot of flexibility to stay within kind of the objectives that the board wants to approach, and also then looking at the variables on how Steve and Eric at PMA can look at how they structure the financial side of it can help us to meet some of the needs that we have from the facility side. So I think this is good news as far as just allowing us some flexibility and options that we're going to be considering.
Any questions before we move on? Thank you, and thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have school district audit services. Steve, you're
Thank you, Joan. I
still up.
just want to point out a couple things with this. First of all, the required communication letter should be viewed as a letter from the audit firm to you as board members. It's not really a letter to Randy or myself. It's a letter to the board indicating during the audit process, what were the major factors that they were taking a look at, and did they have anything that they wanted to share with you as board members. The second attachment is the one with all the numbers in it. Obviously, you've already seen the end of the year financial reports. You've seen them at the annual meeting. You saw them in September. So just keep in mind that you've seen the numbers before, but the required communication letter is where an auditor would indicate information like material concerns, findings that need to be reported to the DPI, or recommendations. And so this letter does include a recommendation. The audit firm is recommending that the district take a look at a cyber assessment. We did talk about that at the budget committee. Jack has been helpful in the last few days trying to give us some resources where we'd be able to do that. I know, Jack, you had some comments at the budget committee meeting. You want to share anything?
No, I think, I think it's important, some of the contacts that we actually were able to pull together. Dave Cadrigal was the former CIO, retired CIO for the state of Wisconsin. Was very helpful in connecting us to Bill Nash. Bill Nash has set up a program, or he's leading a program, which if we do get into cyber attacks, there's some free services at the state level. And I think, as we go through this, we should do an assessment. The assessment, could be relatively modest, from a pricing standpoint. You still have to go out to bid and make some connections, but it should be done. I know the state has looked at for K-12 education in the past, and they've identified not just Waunakee but K-12 overall has some potential vulnerabilities. So I think as we go forward, it's probably important that we do that, take that recommendation from our audit firm and pursue an audit, especially with ransomware and things like that that's in the news these days. I think I would strongly suggest that we pursue that recommendation.
Thank you, Jack.
Do you need anything else from the board? Do you want to vote on this? Or?
So we do have a direction to seek proposals for a cyber assessment. Jack has given us some resources. We will be ultimately bringing that back for approval for the board. So at this time, we would just ask for approval of the 2020-2021 audit for the district.
Okay.
Motion to approve. Second.
Any questions on that audit? And thank you for bringing this forward. It seems like a good plan. All in favor of approving the audit, say aye.
Aye.
Any noes, say no. All right, thank you. Next, we have National Honor Society bylaws and selection process that needs to be tweaked.
Yeah, this was just brought forward to me by Tim Schell and Brian Borowski, and along with our advisor on National Honor Society. Just in reviewing our bylaws, that there were some things that we needed to update with regards to be in compliance with the National Association. This is something that we are bringing forth here. It's part of our selection process as we move forward. If there's any specific questions on what's changed or what some of the rationale is, Tim Schell is here to be able to answer those. But I would ask for tonight for the board just to adopt these so that we can move forward and we have just general consensus on these are the bylaws moving forward for National Honor Society and recognizing those students that qualify.
Motion to approve. Second.
Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
Okay,
Thank you. Announcements?
Yeah, announcements tonight, you'll see in your packet just a commendation for our one act play and Rick Braun and the students who participated and received the Critics' Choice Award. So congratulations to them. It's a super successful program, and Rick and the students do an awesome job.
Perfect. Which brings us to consent agenda. We can take it as a group or pull anything out. I would like to acknowledge our gifts tonight. Lori Heineman donating $1,000 in Jack's name for Innovation Center, and Mefford Oil donating $1,000 for our athletic department through their Pride Pump campaign. So thank you for those generous donations. So a motion to take the consent agenda or pull anything?
Motion to take it all.
Second.
Any questions on anything in there? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, thank you. Which brings us to board business, legislative update, convention, workshops,
Good there.
nothing. Future meetings?
Future agendas, just a kind of an FYI, at a previous meeting, we talked about a report from our subgroup of the board that was looking at the diversity, equity, and inclusion pieces and wanting to have members of the board interact with some of our student clubs. Tim and I are still working on kind of the dates for that. Once we have that, what we will do is we will circulate to the board. I'm guessing that those will take place end of January, beginning of February, but we would like to open that up to board members to be able to be part of that. I think the committee had kind of outlined at least a protocol to use as far as kind of leading some of that discussions, and we'd have some folks from admin there as well.
I'm going to be out of town from February 10th through the 19th.
Okay, very good, very good. So hopefully we can get some of these pieces in, but Tim and I will be in contact probably through Rebecca to have people sign up for that. We also already have a policy committee set for the 26th.
Yep.
So that will continue to move forward. Steve, do you need budget committee at this point?
Yes, I was hoping we could back-to-back budget and facilities again, maybe around like February 7th, February 8th. And Mark, was somebody gonna sit in for you for the budget committee again?
Dave will, as long as Mark needs him.
Okay, so it'd probably be good if those two committees went back-to-back again then?
Sure.
So, would the 7th, 8th, somewhere in there work for?
Either one's fine for me.
Same.
If I didn't have the mask on, I could look at my phone quickly.
February 7th on Monday. Good for me for budget.
Yeah, Monday will work for me.
Did you say will or won't?
Yes.
Okay. So we could do like 5 and 6 o'clock again?
Yep.
Facility first.
Doesn't matter, whatever works.
Yeah.
Facility first. Ted, for you, facility
Oh,
first.
yeah.
5 o'clock and 6 o'clock for budget.
Do we have anything for HRs?
Yeah. Meeting the week of January 31st or February 7th.
I'm good.
Any open? Any
Open.
suggest?
If committee likes the daytime committee schedule, the committee meetings, I really like those.
How about you, Brian?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Week of the 31st, is that what you're looking at, Brian?
Yeah, the week of the 31st is Monday. I mean, we really, any day except for Tuesday.
Okay.
Monday?
You want to do Monday?
Monday,
Sunday?
January 31st,
8:15 or what?
8 8:15-ish again? Does that work with you? Okay.
Yeah, it's all good.
8:15.
Okay. Any other committees? Tim, do you need anything?
Looking down ahead, the third of February is March, so we're scheduling out that far.
Good, if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll need a curriculum committee meeting ideally the week of February 28th, which is also.
Okay.
I think, afternoon on that Monday or Tuesday.
Okay. The curriculum,
February 28th, so
Monday.
I will cover that for Mark if he isn't
Sure.
available.
Monday's good.
Monday's good for me.
What time?
4 o'clock?
I think if we could do that at 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock? Okay.
Does that work?
Yep.
That's all we need.
Okay, that's it. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice, 10 o'clock.
Safe drive home there, Mark.